Chapter 943. P.S. Looking for a guaranteed monthly pass. Looking for a genuine subscription. The 5 elements flying swords flew out, laying down layers of sword nets on the Vajra boy's path. Lu Xiaoyi had to save himself first. The sword light crisscrossed, and the 5 elements rotated. The sword light left deep crisscrossing sword scars on the Vajra boy's golden body. However, such attacks could not stop the Vajra boy's advance. The sword scars disappeared as they appeared, and the Buddhist power contained in them repaired the scars almost instantly, causing no real damage. This was the power of Buddhism, and also the power of Bodhisattva. As Lu Xiaoyi flew back, he continued to rain swords. From the simple 5 elements sword light, it turned into 1,000 sword rain. Wind and rain could not penetrate, and the force was strong. Thousands of cracks appeared on the Vajra boy's body in an instant, but they would recover in an instant. As the sword rain poured out fiercely, the 1,000 sword lights suddenly converged. The next moment, a huge sword light gathered from the 5 elements sword light chopped down. The Vajra boy's head was cut off. The Vajra boy's head was cut off, and he finally stopped less than a mile away from Lu Xiaoyi. He shook his neck, and golden blood flowed out. Then, a new head grew out, and he continued to pursue. Lu Xiaoyi judged that he had been weakened to a certain extent, but he was still far from losing his fighting strength. He did not relax, because the second Vajra boy, the nun with a bun, appeared in his perception. The nun with a bun was a beautiful hair girl. Her whole body's ability was in her beautiful hair. If one looked carefully, they would find that each strand of hair was a small poisonous snake, just like a medusa. The sword light expanded again, and Lu Xiaoyi continued to fly back, getting further and further away from the slug. Bendu Bodhisattva knew his intention, but he did not care and continued to pursue. Obviously, the anomaly was a dead object that could not move for some reason. It was not worth paying attention to. The two of them, one chasing, one fleeing, Bodhisattva was having fun fighting, and Lu Xiaoyi was having a hard time defending. When a powerful Yuanying fought head-on, the difference in their profound accumulation and realm was vividly displayed. If it wasn't a sneak attack, his superior perception would lose its meaning. Not being able to wield his sword as he wished would become his greatest shortcoming. This battle was dangerous. The slug was very clear about everything that was happening around it. Right now, he was in a special state before he reached the nascent soul realm. His senses were sharp and nothing within 50 kilometers could escape his senses. This was a special state that couldn't be maintained for long, but it was enough for him to understand what his friend had encountered. His luck wasn't too good. The place he chose to form his nascent soul was coincidentally too close to the monks, which was why he was in such a dangerous situation. If he had changed the location, perhaps he wouldn't have made such a big commotion. These were all useless now that he thought about it. They were all useless after the fact. In the past 200 years, the conflict between Taoism and Buddhism in the bounded domain had been greatly eased. However, this was only on the surface. It was not that both sides had shaken hands and made peace, but it was a last resort under the pressure of the collapse of the Great Way. In this special environment, if a monk saw a Taoist trying to break through to the next level, it would be easy to guess what he would do. Anyway, no one would know. If a Taoist saw a monk breaking through to the next level, he would do the same. Being as good as each other was the core principle, and this would never change. Ir's strength was impressive. He had tricked 2 ordinary bodhisattvas, but the third one was very difficult. Slug knew this person. He had heard from the elders in the sect that he was a bodhisattva with the greatest strength in the Buddhist sect. His battle prowess was comparable to the top bodhisattvas of the 2 major Buddhist sections. Such a person was not someone a golden core cultivator could kill. The only thing he could do now, and the most important thing to do, was to believe in his friend and believe in himself. Believe in his friend, believe that one ear could hold on until he succeeded in forming his nascent soul. Believe in himself, that he could take this step, because now he could no longer retreat. Once the upper realm began, it was an unpredictable process. This was a difficult challenge for both of them. Lu Xiaoyu was still retreating. He had no choice but to retreat. This environment limited most of his mobility. In his hundreds of years of battle experience, this was one of the rare occasions where he could not use his sword to its full potential, especially when he was facing such a powerful bodhisattva. The number of Vajra boys had increased to 3. Unsullied Light, Bun Nun, and Earth Wisdom Pagoda. Each of them seemed to have an immortal body, and the flying sword had no decisive ability to kill them. If there was only one, he might be able to weaken it by continuously beheading it, just like what he had done to Unsullied Light. However, if there were 3, it would be a little beyond his power. He had almost used the full power of his flying sword, but it could only guarantee that he would not be fatally injured temporarily. He did not know how long he could last, and whether the Bodhisattva would release a 4th Vajra boy, he did not know either. The Vajra boy's ability was different from ordinary Dharma. It was immortality, spiritual intelligence, and indestructible attack power. They were like the avatars of the Bodhisattva. He also knew that stopping the 3 Vajra boys was the last resort. The key was to attack the Bodhisattva himself. However, he had put almost all of his strength into defense, and he had to be careful because he had already tried to take the attacks of the boys with his body. In fact, even if half of the power was offset by the flying sword, his body's defense was still a little weak. Once he put all of his strength into attacking, it was hard to say whether he could kill the Bodhisattva, but he would definitely be torn to pieces by the Vajra boy. This kind of dilemma was unlikely to happen under normal circumstances, because he could use his sword, his exquisite celestial levitation technique, and the profound 5 elements escape to gain a short window of opportunity to attack. But now, as he retreated, Lu Xiaoyu resolutely sank himself into the star shell. He could not guess whether the opponent had the ability to release a 4th Vajra boy, and he could not put his life on luck. Since everyone was unable to escape freely here, then he would make this situation worse. The star shell was an even more dangerous place of fate. He had already tried before, and he could barely control it. Now, he just had to bet on whether the Bodhisattva dared to follow him in. If he could, Lu Xiaoyu did not mind continuing to gamble and go for the star pulp. He had another advantage, which was that the mass of fate in his sea of consciousness was strong enough. It was stronger than the cultivators in the upper world of Zhou Xian, even the cultivators at the level of Yuanying. Slug once said that the great cultivators in the upper world of Zhou Xian had only reached the level of star pulp, and no one could enter the star core. Since this was an area that only the cultivators at the level of Supreme could control, it must be very stressful for the Bodhisattva, right? He had always been cautious and did not want to cross the line. He did not expect that at the last moment, he still had to take this step. His body slid into the membrane of the star shell, and his sword became much more difficult. However, it did not matter, because the 3 Vajra boys who were chasing after him were also in a predicament, and were not as agile as before. There was still time to gamble. Chapter 944. Bendu Bodhisattva was also very depressed. He did not know this person, but after discovering Jin Dan's cultivation and the roots of his sword vein, he knew where this person came from. He was disdainful of the so-called realm crossing. That was only true for those who were not good at fighting, or those who were mediocre. For those who were truly powerful among the nascent soul stage, there was no such thing as a Jin Dan stage cultivator being able to kill someone who was above his level. It was just like how he did not have high hopes of being able to kill a perfected cultivator even though he boasted about his strength. Cultivation, after all, had to follow the rules of cultivation. In ancient times, there was no such thing as realm crossing because cultivators of each realm had to undergo countless trials and hardships. It was unlike the cultivators of today, who had countless shortcuts and countless resources. Therefore, there were countless cultivators who did not live up to their names. This swordsman definitely had a position in Jin Dan's realm. There was no doubt about this, but there was always a limit. There were many things that were pushed up by people. Just like the Buddhist disciples he was familiar with, In his eyes, they were just that. They were very outstanding, that was all. The reason why he could have such a high position in Jin Dan was because of the Buddhist sect's secret embellishment and support. Who didn't know how to set an example? However, as soon as he took over the battle, he realized that his understanding might have been wrong. There really were monsters in this world. This 1 year's flying sword was not something that Jin Dan should have at his realm. He had also encountered Yuanying swordsmen before and even killed a few in the void of the universe. The power of the sword technique, and the splitting of the sword light were all inferior to this 1 year. If his cultivation did not clearly show the limitations of Jin Dan, then this person was definitely a Yuanying swordsman. His 8 Vajra boys were very famous among the Yuanying bodhisattvas in Zhou Xian's cultivation world. Zhou Xian did not have a ranking, but he himself believed that he could be ranked in the top 10 of this realm. This was not boasting, it was the truth. Among the 8 Vajra boys, 5 attacked and 3 supplemented. He had never used 5 Vajra boys at the same time before. Firstly, he had never met such a troublesome opponent. Secondly, using 5 Vajra boys at the same time was a great challenge to him. Especially in this place, where luck was different, he could not use 5 Vajra boys at the same time. 3 Vajra boys was already difficult, 4 Vajra boys was probably his limit. Using 2 Vajra boys was already enough for him to sweep through the same realm as him in Zhou Xian. But now, after using 3 Vajra boys for half a day, other than causing some minor injuries to his opponent, he did not achieve any substantial results. This guy's sword light division was very exquisite. He wondered how a small Jin Dan could have such strong spiritual power. The more outstanding he was, the more he had to kill this kind of seed in the bud. If he really became a talent, how many Buddhist monks would be destroyed by his hands? This was a guy who was very unfriendly to Buddhism. He had to be eliminated quickly. The current environment was just right. No one was watching and no one knew. It was the best time to make a move. He was thinking, should he use another Vajra boy? Or should he continue to grind? If he continued to grind, he would definitely win. This was the trend, but he was a little worried that there would be an accident. Just as he was hesitating, this 1 year took the initiative to sink into the star shell. This was an environment that even he had to deal with carefully. How could a Jin Dan be so daring? He had no one to blame but himself for seeking death. In the eyes of these grand cultivators, the inside and outside of the star shell was a threshold. In the halo, they could still hold on with their foundation. But once they entered the star shell, the control of luck would be different. It was not something that could be dealt with through trickery. Handu Bodhisattva followed closely. If Jin Dan dared to go down, why wouldn't he? His identity was a little special. He had received the true teachings of the 2 Buddhist sects regarding the secrets of the star sea's core. He was not afraid. The only thing that worried him was that this golden core cultivator had an abnormal perception ability. In the astral layer, his perception was even further than his own. If this golden core cultivator escaped out of his perception range, then there would be no way to find him. Therefore, he could not afford to lose even a single step. The star shell was called a shell because it was thin. Here, the swordsman's movement was restricted. This was a stupid choice. Was he betting that he would not dare to come in? The 2 of them circled around in the planet's shell, and the battle became even more dangerous. However, the pace of the battle slowed down, because in this place, their every move was greatly influenced by the power of providence. In their battle, a third party, the environment, had joined, and it was a third party that would never disappear. Whether it was Lu Xiaoyi or Handu Bodhisattva, in addition to attacking and defending, they also had to be entangled with this third party. In this aspect, Handu Bodhisattva was obviously much stronger than Jin Dan. Handu Bodhisattva had a premonition that this little opponent did not have much time left. Lu Xiaoyi was making his final preparations. Moving in the star shell, he did not lose to Bodhisattva at all. If he used his full strength, he might even be slightly stronger. The reason why he did this was to create an illusion that he was unable to hold on. Feigning defeat was the most classic, simplest, and most effective tactic in battle. Practitioners were all cautious people, and it was hard to be fooled. This required a step-by-step seduction, a battle hint, a psychological hint. He also did not want to run into the star flesh. So, he needed a sharp counterattack. There was only one chance. Otherwise, if Bodhisattva really fought steadily, the gap between their realms would become bigger and bigger. His body began to move closer to the inner wall of the star shell. He was only one step away from the star flesh. He had wandered around here before and then left. So Bodhisattva did not feel anything different. The pressure from the three Vajra boys was so heavy that he could not spare any energy to fight back. Bodhisattva was surprised by his tenacity. He also felt helpless against the three Vajra boys. They were like three unkillable Calabash brothers. In the entanglement, he made a mistake in blocking the sword light and gave the three Vajra boys a chance to pounce on him together. This was intentional. His sword skills were well practiced. How could he make such a mistake? At the moment when the three Vajra boys were close to him, Lu Xiaoyi suddenly disappeared. The next moment, he had moved a few miles forward and appeared closer to Bodhisattva. This was a risk. Using a space skill like the heavenly sword ruler in front of a Bodhisattva who had mastered the Tao of Space could easily be interrupted by the big practitioner, and trapped in the space. So, he did not use it because he knew that he could only use it once. When Bodhisattva was on guard, he would have to stop using it. This time, being close to Bodhisattva provided him with a rare opportunity to attack. Thousands of sword lights of the Big Dipper came out from his dantian and flew toward Bodhisattva. At the same time, the flying sword that had never been used, no matter how dangerous it was, also quietly disappeared into the storm of fate. Bendu chanted the name of Buddha. He had been waiting for this swordsman's final struggle for a long time. He did not expect him to be able to endure for so long. If he could sneak up on his two companions, could he sneak up on him? Chapter 945. Slug let out a soft whistle. After 2 months, he finally got what he wanted. Forming a nascent soul was indeed difficult for ordinary cultivators, but for a top Gene Dan cultivator like him, the proportion was very large. This could be seen from his circle of friends. After all, they were the elites of the elites who had been carefully selected. It was a bit embarrassing to spend so much effort to form a nascent soul. Fortunately, he succeeded. No matter what method he used, he succeeded. After reaching the upper realm of each stage, cultivators needed a certain amount of time to consolidate. This was a cliché, but it was also necessary because when you reached a new realm, you would have new feelings, a new power system, and new everything. In fact, in the cultivation world, there were also cases of cultivators who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth and fought recklessly after reaching the upper realm. As a result, their realm regressed. It was rare, but it did happen. Therefore, what he should do now was to take advantage of the new realm and stay where he was to consolidate his body. After the initial stabilization, he could return to the mountain gate and spend a few decades to consolidate his body. This was the right way to go. He was a disciple of a big sect, so he was not unfamiliar with this set of procedures. It was also often pointed out by the elders. But he could not do this now. He had just formed a nascent soul, and there was no time to celebrate. Taking advantage of the temporary state of emptiness during the initial stage of yuanying, his body flew towards the direction of the battle without hesitation. He had to hurry. When this state was over, he might not have the ability to enter the star shell for a while. He was the one who pulled ear over. He could not let his friend be in danger for protecting him after he succeeded. This was not the way of a cultivator, nor was it the way of a friend. Sincere knew that he was no match for him, but still wanted to pull Bendu Bodhisattva away. He would not hesitate to do so even if he knew that it would be inappropriate for him. Time was of the essence. He did not know if Ear could hold on until now, but regardless of whether he could or not, he wanted to see him alive or dead. If Ear really had an accident while protecting him, then he would have a lot of work to do in this lifetime. He knew the general direction, but as the fight went on, he ran far away, so he needed to look for him carefully. This guy was extremely daring. He even dared to enter Jean Dan's shell and fought back and forth. Therefore, he also rushed into the shell at the first opportunity. This was the ability that was bestowed upon him by the heavenly axiom when he first became a Yuanyi. It would be withdrawn very soon. As for how he was going to get out after it was withdrawn, he did not have the time to think about it. Bendu Bodhisattva spread his monk robes, and another Vajra boy appeared to save Hui. This was the reason why he didn't send out the 4 King Kong warriors to hunt down the swordsman. The swordsman orthodoxy was particularly good at putting up a desperate struggle. He had already experienced this when he killed the other Yuanying swordsman in the void of space. Therefore, he had reserved some strength to deal with the retaliation of the swordsman. Sure enough, this guy took the risk of using his unfamiliarized spatial ability to instantly break free from the entanglement of the 3 Vajras and launch an attack on him. Facing such a violent storm, the Stellar Sword Light Division was even more concentrated than the 5 Elements Sword Light Division. This was the ability to save Hui. He noticed that this time, the swordsman's flying swords didn't come out from the top of his head, but from his dantian. There was no process of separating the swords at all. Instead, thousands of swords appeared out of nowhere, which surprised him a little. Once the swords appeared, they splashed out and gathered again, forming a gigantic Big Dipper light sword. Lu Xiaoyi did not use the 5 Elements sword formation to attack at the same time because he had to keep it to fend off the 3 Vajra boys who were rushing at him from behind. He wanted Bodhisattva's life, but he did not want to die together with him. If he really used all his sword spirits, he might not even be able to kill Bodhisattva. He wouldn't even last a breath under the attacks of the 3 King Kong warriors. Moreover, Big Dipper's converged sword strike wasn't the only one. There was still the luck cutter lurking in the dark. The battle instantly reached its climax. In the first breath, Big Dipper's converged sword came down, and Bodhisattva was on the verge of collapse. He temporarily lost his ability. In the second breath, the unsullied light, the Nun Bun Bun, and the Pagoda of Earth Wisdom swooped down crazily and collided with the 5 Elements sword formation that Lu Xiaoyi had summoned. Because Lu Xiaoyi was distracted, the 3 Vajra boys rushed straight in and were within reach. In the third breath, Luck Cutter arrived. At the same time, Bodhisattva's 5th King Kong warrior appeared. Summon. Luck Cutter's strength lay in its special effect on the mystic, not its power itself. At the same time, Summon's function was to counter the mystic's defense. This was a Buddhist monk summoned to Buddha. When 2 against 1, both sides would suffer. He had to admit that in terms of explosiveness, experience, and foresight, Bodhisattva had hundreds of years of life. This made Lu Xiaoyi understand that the older the ginger, the spicier the ginger. Lu Xiaoyi had been planning for a long time, while Bodhisattva had adapted to the situation. The difference between the two was self-evident. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. It seemed that it was impossible to kill this Bodhisattva unscathed. But it was not that he had no other way. It was just that it was a little similar to perishing together. Bodhisattva's ability made him give up all his fantasies. Then, let's go with the most ruthless. Ruthless to others and ruthless to himself. Luck Cutter was about to arrive, and Summon was about to face off against Mystic. Bodhisattva suddenly felt that something was wrong, and a warning sign appeared in his heart. In the next instant, an invisible bird had already crashed into his sea of consciousness. Bird deity. Originally, in Lu Xiaoyi's plan, this was already the last step. He thought that under such continuous attacks, no matter who it was, Bodhisattva would have to give up. But Bodhisattva's reaction and ability were beyond his imagination. He suddenly felt that even if bird deity attacked, he did not have much confidence. So, in for a penny, in for a pound. Seeing the 3 Vajra boys in front of him, he did not dodge. Instead, he wrapped himself in the 5 Elements sword formation, forming the strongest defense since he started cultivating. He was tall, and with a circle of his arms, he had already hugged the 3 Vajra boys in his arms. Enduring the crushing attacks and the crazy influx of Buddhist power, he plunged into the star pulp. This was the reason why he chose to fight in the inner wall of the star pulp. It was because it was convenient to risk his life. With one step, he had already entered the star pulp. In an instant, Bodhisattva, who was still fighting with bird deity in his sea of consciousness, was also brought into the star pulp. This was the result of Lu Xiaoyi's observation from the beginning of the battle until now. Although the Vajra boys were powerful, they were inseparable from Bodhisattva and could not be abandoned. Otherwise, it would not be enough to achieve the immortality of the Vajra boys. When Lu Xi lost his sword, it was because Jin Dan was not in the Space Tao realm and the sword could not follow him. But Bodhisattva was already in the Yuanying realm and was in the Space Tao realm, so it was impossible for him to lose the Vajra boys. Otherwise, Bodhisattva could pull the 3 Vajra boys out, but with Lu Xiaoyi desperately hugging them, he could not pull them out. Or Bodhisattva could follow him in. This was his natal connection, so it was not up to him to decide. Therefore, when Lu Xiaoyi carried the 3 Vajra brothers and stepped into the star pulp, which was also the moment Bendu Bodhisattva entered the star pulp, he had no choice. Chapter 946. The feeling of being in the star pulp was completely different from being in the star shell. Even though the two of them had just entered. This was a swamp. Under the shackles of providence, countless unknown substances formed a swamp. Once a person was in it, they would be uncontrollably sucked in. It was as if the depths of the star core was their true home. As long as it was something related to providence, it didn't matter if it was a living or dead thing, the outcome would be the same. Lu Xiaoyi was deeply familiar with the fundamental principles of the star core. He didn't resist at all when he entered, completely giving up on struggling, even though there were 3 Vajra brothers beside him. He treated himself as a pure wisp of providence, drifting with the flow. In fact, he couldn't struggle at all because his body was almost smashed by the Vajra brothers. He was like a broken sack. Bangdu was much stronger than him because he was almost uninjured. The only thing that was injured was the traces left behind by the sparrow god's attack in his sea of consciousness. The moment he entered, his mind was a little muddled, and he was still thinking of commanding the Vajra brothers to attack. With this thought, he fell even faster into the depths of the star pulp. Not only him, but also his Vajra brothers. Bangdu immediately realized that something was wrong. The reason why he fell faster was not only because his providence was inferior to Lu Xiaoyi's, but also because of his 5 Vajra brothers. The more he split, the more providence he would attract, and in the end, it would fall on his main body. When he realized this, Bangdu immediately kept the 5 Vajra brothers. He knew that he couldn't use force in the star pulp, not even thinking about it. The problem was that this didn't change the fact that he was falling towards the star core. Although he was slower, he was still faster than the swordsman. It didn't matter, both of them would die. No one could save them. He glared angrily like an angry Vajra. What he didn't expect was that no matter how careful he was, he would still end up dying together with the swordsman. In the last moment of contact, he dealt with everything else perfectly. The only thing he didn't expect was the powerful and unbreakable sparrow god's mental attack. This was a crucial attack. Although it didn't cause much damage to him, it made him lose his ability to judge for a few breaths. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come in. Even if he had to give up half of his cultivation and cut off his connection with the 3 Vajra boys, he still wouldn't enter. It was precisely because he had been absent-minded for several breaths that his body instinctively chose to follow the Vajra boy's incarnation to life and death. It was precisely because of the delay of several breaths that he did not take decisive measures to leave as soon as he entered the star pulp. Instead, he encouraged the Vajra boy to continue attacking. This was the real reason why he had fallen to such a state. Now, he had already lost the best opportunity to leave. Even if he completely emptied his mind, he would not be able to stop the initial speed of his fall. If he used his chi to resist, he would only fall faster. Not resisting this damned initial speed. That was the speed of death that was left to him when he was absent-minded for several breaths. Staring at the swordsman, He no longer had the magnanimity, elegance, and calmness of a Buddhist monk. Instead, he was behaving like a human being. Bastard! Ignorant man! Sword dregs! Even if you can perish together with this old monk, so what? I've lived a few hundred years longer than you. Just this little bit is worth it. As a monk in my next life, I vow to kill all swordsmen in the world and clear the universe. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. He was also falling, but his speed was slightly slower. He did not dare to use his strength. Even if it was the power of fate, he still had his initial speed. This was the after effect of bringing 3 Vajragord brothers with him. This was something that could not be avoided. Bald donkey, you trash! You've lived a few hundred years on a dog's body. If you knew it was me, why did you struggle? Couldn't you have left earlier? You just had to compete with me. Great, now your 1,000 years of cultivation has been destroyed. You can't even die happily. You'll have to meet the king of hell in endless fear. Do you regret it now? Bentu's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. He had cultivated well and had a bright future ahead of him. 36 Khanate great Taoists were still waving at him. It was the time for a surging storm and a great opportunity. But because of a small Jin Dan, he had buried everything here. It would be a lie to say that he did not regret it. This regret could become a memory, but at that time, he was already at a loss. Under the circumstances back then, how could a peak bodhisattva be scared away by a small Jin Dan? If there is a next life, I will definitely kill you, including all your friends and family. Your sect's orthodoxy. Your... Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. This monk was so angry that he had gone mad. That's right, who could accept failing miserably at such an easy task? All right, save your energy. If you have the time, why don't you make a final memory of your life? Think about what you did wrong to end up like this. If you had stayed in the temple to cultivate Buddhism, would you have such an ending? Why did you have to come to the core of the Sea of Stars to steal the fate? Do you think others don't know what you Buddhists are up to? Bentu laughed sinisterly. His state of mind had completely collapsed. Lu Xiaoyi was right about one thing. He did not cultivate Buddhism. Usually, he was fine, but when faced with a dead end, he would naturally collapse. He was far from being as indifferent as a true virtuous monk. He cursed. Little thoughts? Hee hee. What do you know? Not to mention a lowly Jin Dan like you, even the perfected lords of your Taoist sect might not understand. Although I can't see it, I know that Taoism, including your sword vein, not only the small fries in Zhou Xian, but also the truly top-notch sword vein in the universe will be destroyed in the future calamity. Only Buddhists will be the only ones in the universe. Ha ha ha! Lu Xiaoyi's expression did not change. He could clearly see through people who were about to die. Some people would speak the truth, while others would not. For example, this bodhisattva was one whose rationality had destroyed him. What he said might be partly true, but most of it was just his own delusion. This was the psychological struggle of a person who was about to die, so why take it seriously? He was just comforting himself. From the top of his head, a white gas that was like a snake stretched out and rolled down. It was an upgraded version of Yuanying. Lu Xiaoyi grabbed it and laughed. His heavy injuries made it difficult for him to breathe, but he still laughed happily. Ha ha, bald donkey, I'll stop teasing you. Go to Yama's palace and show off your power to the little rascal. I still have to struggle in the mortal world for hundreds or thousands of years. Tell me, which of the 36 Khanate great Taoists should I choose? Ha ha! Bendu looked at the white gas and instinctively reached out to grab it, but how could he? His blood and chi were in reverse, and he was on the verge of going crazy. Yet the sword dregs were still angering him. Do you know why someone saved me? Because this young master owes someone spirit stones. The most desperate rescue in the world is when a creditor rescues his debtor. Because if he can't save me, no one will return his spirit stones. Ha ha! Someone scolded from above. You're about to die, but you still can't shut your stinky mouth. Below, blood mist filled the air, and a Tao disintegration phenomenon formed. Before he was dragged into the core of the planet, Bendu Bodhisattva had angered himself to death. Chapter 947. The slug pulled the foul-mouthed thing out of the star pulp and flew away, scolding as he flew. "You're so useless, little ear. You angered the great Bodhisattva to death. If this gets out, you'll be the best at talking. Besides, am I the kind of person who haggles over every ounce of debt?" Lu Xiaoyi said weakly. "Finally, I've heard some good news." "What, you don't want your 1,000 spirit stones anymore?" the slug said fiercely. "Why not? I went through so much trouble to drag you out just so you can renege on your debt? Not only that, but there'll also be interest." The two of them quickly left the star crust and the star halo. In fact, the slug was dragging Lu Xiaoyi because he couldn't fly anymore. However, the slug wouldn't fly to the nearest land because that would take time. What he and Lu Xi needed the most right now was peace. After leaving the star halo, the slug took out a flying spiritual tool that was prepared for Lu Xiaoyi. He only needed to sit cross-legged in the air. He took out several big pills from his storage ring. Those were top-grade pills specially made by the Qingwei Immortal Sect. They were used when fighting with monks and were essential for Taoists. He placed them beside Lu Xiaoyi, who was on the spiritual tool. "1 big pill for 1,000 spirit stones. Isn't this too much?" Lu Xiaoyi snorted. "Why don't you just rob me? I don't have any, not even one. Why don't you put it on the tab first?" The slug was very dissatisfied. "How can you talk to your martial uncle like that? I'm afraid that the more debts there are, the more unwilling people will be to repay them." The two of them adjusted their breathing. The slug was consolidating his realms so that he could fight. Lu Xiaoyi was a little miserable. He was beaten badly when he hugged the 3 diamond-gourd babies. Now that he thought about it, he was too stupid. He only needed to hug one. Why did he have to hug all 3? But now, he had to suffer 2 more beatings. For the current him, the injuries on his body were very serious, but this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was how to disperse the Buddhist power in his body. As a Taoist, if he could not completely dispel the power of Buddha, the further he went, the more dangerous it would be for him. To Lu Xiaoyi, it was already difficult for him to pass the upper realm. If the Buddhist chants and the power of Buddha came out to mess things up, what was the point of continuing? Therefore, what the slug gave him was the best pill in the Qingwei Immortal Sect for dispelling Buddhist energy. Now that his friend was in trouble, if he didn't deal with it properly, it might affect his upper realm cultivation. This made Slug feel very uneasy. Like Lu Xiaoyi, he didn't know how to apologize, so he could only use jokes. As for the injuries on his body, it would take about 1.5 years. With Jean Dan's recovery ability, it wouldn't be difficult for him to recover. In this aspect, the Taoists were very experienced. They stayed here to do preliminary control. When the Buddhist power in Lu Xiaoyi's body was slightly relieved, Slug would directly send him back to the Carefree Travel Club. Only a great cultivator of the sect would be able to prevent this kind of injury from leaving any hidden dangers. Of the two of them, one was floating in the air to consolidate, and the other was healing himself in the spirit weapon. Time passed quickly. Occasionally, there would be cultivators passing by, but after noticing the Yuanying aura emitted by Slug, they would stay far away. No one would come to find trouble. 10 days later, Slug, who had been observing his friend's injuries, decisively stopped his consolidation. He was very clear that Lu Xiaoyi's injuries were more important to the two of them now. "Let's go! I'll send you home after I've consolidated. It's so troublesome. I hate to bring a sick person home. It's not convenient." Lu Xiaoyi was not pretentious. There was no need for that. The two of them had similar temperaments, and it was also a kind of fate for them to meet. What was there to think? The Slug controlled the spiritual weapon and flew straight to the nearest little land of black gold. Now that he was a Yuanying realm perfected one, his speed was naturally different. He was very smug all the way. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi was not convinced and mocked him all the way. When they arrived at the crack in little continent Xianjin, Lu Xiui stopped his friend who was anxiously rushing in. Slug, I'm not going back to Carefree Mountain. Send me to Rust Mountain. Slug's eyes widened. He still didn't understand. There's an old Chinese doctor there? Can he cure Buddhist diseases? Don't tell me you've been beaten silly by that monk? There's not even a spiritual opportunity in that place. Do you know that it will greatly affect your body's recovery? Also, Buddhist powers are very strange. Don't be so self-righteous and think that you can solve it alone. Your flying sword is passable, but the rest are sloppy. Do you think I don't know? Do you know that you're biased? Listen to me on this matter. Only those old guys in the sect have this kind of ability. Do you have a bad relationship with the elders in Carefree Mountain? It's okay. Come back to Qingwei with me. I promise I'll find a perfected cultivator to help you. Lu Xiaoyi patted his shoulder. I know everything you said. But the reason why I want to go to Rust Mountain is not only to heal my injuries, but also because I have a feeling and want to use it to break through. My injuries and the Buddhist powers in my body can help me. Slug was speechless. You're crazy, Lu Xiaoyi retorted. Don't talk about me. Aren't you also crazy for coming to the core of the Sea of Stars? The slug was left speechless. He understood that mavericks like them had a very different way of thinking from normal people. If this guy was like a normal cultivator and also followed the rules of the sect to break through under the protection of the elders, then he would find it strange. But he still had to confirm it. You're not stimulated by my success, are you? I'm very talented. Ordinary people can't compare to me. Lu Xiaoyi laughed and scolded. You're very talented? You were forced to go to the core of the planet to seek death. How shameless of you to say that. I'm not being impulsive. I've made this decision after careful consideration these days. You should support me, just like how I supported you going to the core of the planet to seek death. Slug could no longer object. In fact, he also agreed with Fong Ning in his heart. It was actually a very clever method to completely eliminate the remnants of the Buddhist powers by breaking through to the nascent soul realm. This was because the transformation of the body during the nascent soul realm was not something that could be done with the help of outsiders, even if it was a perfected cultivator. Of course, this was very dangerous. It was a type of wealth found in danger, but both of them were like this. They felt that this was normal and different from the rest. Only then could they become superior Yuanying. Okay, I'll accompany you to Rust Mountain for a few years. It's the same for me to consolidate my strength there. Lu Xiaoyi refused. There's no need for that. I'm accompanying you to the core of the planet because it's very dangerous there. But there's not even a single cultivator in the little land of Rust Mountain. What danger can there be? I'm going to choose a spiritless environment to completely transform my body. What's the point of you going there? You're putting yourself in a desperate situation. You can do it. Haha, we're both the same. We don't take the usual path. I support you. I'll send you there and give you a coffin while I'm at it. If you can't take it, you can just lie in it. He was also a decisive person and could understand his friend's feelings. Therefore, he directly walked through the crack and went to the little land closest to Rust Mountain. Then, he flew straight to Rust Mountain and through Lu Xiaoyi on a mountain peak. Once you support someone, don't be wishy-washy and say nonsense to affect your friend's mood. The transportation cost is 1,000 spirit stones. I'll put it on my tab. He disappeared. Chapter 948. Lu Xiaoyi returned to Rust Mountain, feeling a little sad. He didn't come to this place for a certain person. It was a beautiful misunderstanding, but it had nothing to do with cultivation. Speaking of missing, the person he missed the most was his mother. There was a period of time in that year when he really thought that his mother was still alive, and he just couldn't find the way home. It was a feeling he had not felt for many years. It was very warm because his family was waiting for him. The rusty little Lu gave him a good feeling. When the spiritual vigor filled this world, the spiritless little Lu seemed very special. The rarer something was, the more valuable it was. The reason why he had come here was because this place was devoid of spirits, and nothing else. Absolute silence, no one disturbed him. He had cultivated for 600 years and was used to being alone. He liked to be alone when he was cultivating, and he also liked to be alone when he was healing. Of course, he also needed to be alone when he was in the upper realm. He did not need the help of others because his body was his and only he knew it best. He chose the mountain peak where he stayed the last time he came here. The original appearance of the thatched cottage was almost unrecognizable. The only traces left here were the paw prints of wild beasts. Because there were no cultivators, it was impossible for mortals to climb such a place. Lu Xiaoyi re-erected the thatched cottage. It was not necessary, but it was a feeling. After everything was arranged properly, he sat cross-legged on the mountain peak and recalled his purpose of coming here. He was very sure that it was time to break through to the nascent soul realm. If it was not because his friends were all in the nascent soul realm, he had to do it. Even if the people around him went up, Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword could still beat them up. The reason why he wanted to do this was because he felt that the time was right. That was all. He did not need to settle down because he had always been settling down. He also did not need to sharpen his state of mind because he had been sharpening it for hundreds of years. His experience over the years was actually a process of training in all aspects. He only needed to wait for his cultivation. Once his cultivation reached a certain level, the opportunity would appear at any time. He took a deep breath and took out the ancient seal from the mountain gate. His body instantly entered the space of the small world. After more than 200 years of vicissitudes, under the changes of the core of the Taipu meteorite, the small world had completely changed its old form. It was no longer stacked and collapsed. Instead, it had completely stabilized. All kinds of Tao realms were also growing in a balanced manner. It was like a miniature version of a small universe. In this place, the Taiposhi meteor rock was the master, and he was the master of Taiposhi. Every day, he would observe and comprehend for several hours. He knew everything in this place like the back of his hand, from the formation of mountains to the growth of plants. Everything was in his mind. He thought about it carefully again. It wasn't perfect, but it was feasible. To swordsmen, this was a gamble. After communicating with the core of the Taipu meteor rock, they had been discussing this for a long time. Therefore, there was no surprise. This was the result of their discussion. Under Taiposhi's control, the barrier of the entire small world started to move irregularly. As a result, a relatively weak area appeared on one side of the barrier. It was very small and inconspicuous. Silently sensing the changes in the spatial barrier, the four seasons flew out. Seizing the moment when the five elements switched, he slashed at the barrier. Instantly, the space of the small world started to shake. This was the first time the small world was connected to the main space ever since it was formed. Too many things flowed in and out of the small world. The laws of heaven, the laws of space, and the laws of time were all balanced to a certain extent because of this window. A month later, the shaking stopped. The small world still maintained its independent characteristics compared to the main world. However, once this window was opened, it could no longer be closed. Because of Lu Xiaoyi and Taiposhi's deliberate actions, the small world would eventually be completely integrated into the rusty little continent with the passage of time. It would become a part of the main world and become history. This integration would take tens of thousands of years. At this time, Lu Xiaoyi was gradually becoming weaker. During this period of time, he didn't care about his own body at all. He didn't care about his blood, flesh, and veins, nor did he get rid of the influence of the Buddhist power. He was already in a state of terminal illness. Now, even if he returned to the sect, even if he had the help of a supreme cultivator, it would be impossible for him to return to his old state. In the words of a senior cultivator, his foundation had been destroyed, and there was no hope for the great Tao. At most, he could only make do with living. Because he was courting death, he missed the most precious time to recover. This was also the time that the slug had hurriedly bought for him. He didn't care. Because he didn't want to be treated at all. What he wanted was a new life. In the 200 years of interaction with Taiposhi, they both felt a trend, a change, and an epoch-making significance for the small world. That was, after 200 years of recuperation, the time was ripe for the birth of the first intelligent life in this small world. Breaking the spatial barrier of the small world, 1. Was to introduce the laws of heaven of the main world so that the life born here could enjoy the bath of the heavenly Tao of the main world. 2. Taiposhi was no longer satisfied with just changing a small world. He wanted to change a bigger space. The main world. And Lu Xiaoyi just so happened to join in. He hoped that he would be the first intelligent life born in this small world, although it was a little strange. Was there any treatment cleaner, purer, and more thorough than rebirth? There was none. Therefore, he didn't want to treat it, because it was useless. In any case, he had to break it and reforge it. Since he had already reached this step, there was no turning back. The ancient spirit of Taipu happily circled above his head. It also realized that the opportunity it had been waiting for was about to arrive, so it encouraged its human friend from the side. The laws of Taiposhi's incarnation also sent an invitation to him in this space. This was the common wish of the three of them, the wish of a new life. This was the difference between Lu Xiaoyi and the slug. The slug was completely gambling, but Lu Xiaoyi was gambling with a plan and purpose under the laws of heaven. For this gamble, he had started to plan 200 years ago. His own plan was also waiting for the heavenly Tao's plan. When the change in the core of the sea of stars destroyed his body, he knew that the node of this plan had arrived. That was why he told his friend with certainty that he was going to start too. This had nothing to do with the changes in the others. Now, the basic conditions were met, at least he couldn't think of anything else to prepare. He had the laws of heaven, because he had broken the barrier of the small world. He had the laws of great Tao, because Taiposhi was his friend, and would give him the most selfless help in his rebirth. He had the ability to reforge his body. Because in this space, the birth of the first intelligent life was a trend that couldn't be stopped. He had the conditions to form his nascent soul. The ancient spirit of Taipu wasn't his war spirit, but another him. He had the resources of spiritual opportunity. It wasn't the spirit stones in his storage ring, but the jade-clear spiritual opportunity that had started to overflow in the small world. What was there to hesitate about? Lu Xiaoyi shouted and activated his inner secret. He shattered everything, including his body, meridians, dantian, divine soul, sparrow palace, and even the 7 sword spirits. He only left a little bit of his true spirit behind to cater to that unstoppable new life force. Chapter 949. P.S. Please guarantee a monthly ticket, please read it. The trend was the direction of the Great Tao. It was not a Great Tao, but a consensus reached by all the connate Great Taos when the small universe was gradually formed. It was the heavenly Tao itself. Therefore, there was no factor in this universe that could change this trend. Time flowed eternally. Change began to happen slowly. Once it began, this process was an irreversible torrent. No one could stop it. Even Lu Xiaoyi himself could only watch. Feel it. Because he had already given a new life to the heavenly Tao. The first thing to take shape was the divine soul. Without a soul, there was no life. This was also the first product of Lu Xiaoyi's true spirit under the guidance of the heavenly Tao. Due to its powerful spiritual power, when its true spirit expanded and fused with the power of the small universe, it was infinitely refined and condensed. When it expanded again, it had already formed a spiritual body that seemed to have substance. Lu Xiaoyi looked at his spiritual body. It could change infinitely according to his will. Caterpillars, octopuses, men, women, plants. He never thought that he would be able to see his own spiritual state one day. This was a qualitative change. It was not just a matter of the strength of the energy. It also included the foundation of more than 30 connate great Taos in the small universe, The fusion allowed his spirit to reach the sky in a single step. At the same time, he had a preliminary understanding of more than 30 great Taos. Among them, his understanding of the 5 elements had deepened, and he was close to the essence of the great Tao. There were also many that he understood for the first time. This was a completely new beginning. It meant that when he chose the direction of the great Tao, he would no longer have to spend so much effort to comprehend a certain great Tao. More than 30 great Taos had been initiated at the same time. Of course, which one to choose was a problem for the future. There were also flaws. There was no morality. There was no fate. There was no merit. He had become a person without virtue. He did not know what such a strange change meant. When the rebirth of the spirit was almost complete, the next step of the reconstruction of the body had already begun. It was as if every cell had been tainted by the great Tao. He could do as he pleased and construct his body according to the best golden ratio of humans. This was not a physical cultivation technique, but the best physical cultivation technique in the universe. Lu Xiaoyi did not participate in the structure of his body. Instead, he allowed the Creator to arrange it. He accepted the heavenly Tao's most basic understanding of humans, just like the ancestors of humans. Luckily, it wasn't a monkey. In the course of human development, there would always be changes of this sort. There were good aspects, such as becoming stronger, smarter, and closer to the essence of Tao. There were also bad aspects, such as diseases, heredity, and imperfections. Fortunately, the heavenly axiom was a body of laws that kept pace with the times. It did not turn Lu Xiaoyi into a monster with arms that reached his knees and hair all over his body. The most important thing was the inner quality. The tightness of the muscles, the purity of the blood vessels, the toughness of the tendons, the integrity of the acupoints, the hardness of the bones. These were the perfect template of a perfect human being. Lu Xiaoyi only provided some opinions on 2 items, and they were both external opinions. He maintained his old appearance. He didn't want to become the Panin of the cultivation world and become a heartthrob. The other was a man's characteristic. Well, it was more obvious. This was understandable. However, this was only the beginning of a new life when the mind and body fused into one. Because next, changes would begin to occur. The 7 sword spirits had already lost their original bodies. Their original bodies had been turned into ashes by Lu Xiaoyi's determination. Now they were only in the form of 7 sword spirits, flying around their master's sea of consciousness by themselves. Having lost their bodies, they were very hesitant. Only by being by their master's side could they feel safe. Without a real sword, how could they attack? How could they revolve the sword? How could they vibrate? How could they split? Under Lu Xiaoyi's observation and the guidance of the heavenly Tao's rules, the 7 sword spirits began to huddle together for warmth. They gathered together, and after receiving their master's encouragement, they began to fuse together, becoming each other. The 5 elements, star, fate, these mutually incompatible great Taos, together with the other great Taos that were injected by the will of the small universe, slowly reached a kind of balance between them. The balance of the origin of the universe. 2 great Taos might not be able to coexist peacefully, but if all the great Taos were gathered together, they would definitely be able to reach a balance. This was because the universe itself was a balance of countless great Taos. In this kind of change, Lu Xiaoyi had to make a choice. Should he completely become a swordsman, the type of inner sword? Or should he still insist on the path of a real sword? There were no obstacles to becoming an inner sword. If he was willing, the fusion of the 7 sword spirits could become a sword pellet. It would produce a heavenly Tao sword pellet that even the small world of the sword tomb couldn't produce. But he still liked swords. A real sword. A sword hilt, sword guard, sword ridge, sword edge, sword tip. This was the most natural, the most mortal, the most simple, the most plain, and also the closest to the essence of a great Tao. Under his will, the sword began to take shape. It no longer used the so-called top-notch 5 elements materials. Instead, it was extracted from the most basic particles in the small universe, compressed, refined, and arranged. From a certain point of view, every particle was a sword. This real sword that was formed from trillions of particles was also given a brand new meaning. It could be rolled, pellet, held, and split. He knew that in the future, he would have to consider new ways to attack with his sword. There were countless possibilities. One sword spirit, one sword. This was the choice that he and the heavenly Tao had made. There was still one last hurdle. He needed to give his sword a name, as the sword's spirit was eternal. In order to commemorate the 7 little fellows, in order to show their willingness, Lu Xiaoyi carved 2 seal characters on the sword's spine near the sword's hilt, 7 ants. He understood that this sword would accompany him for the rest of his life. With it, he would never cultivate another sword spirit, no matter if it was a nascent soul or a true monarch. Even if he really became an immortal, this sword would be his one and only. It would accompany him in his growth, in his battle, and in his death. That was enough. There was still one more thing. He had the spirit, the body, and the sword spirit, but he didn't have the cultivation realm. The heavenly Tao didn't support perfection. Therefore, in his understanding of the Tao, he was left with 3 holes: morality, fate, and merit. The heavenly Tao had the same attitude towards a new life. Therefore, although humans were the overlords of the universe's cultivation world, they had to start from being mortals. Those ancient sacred beasts were born with powerful abilities, but they could only exist in single digits. They couldn't spread their bloodlines widely and multiply endlessly. If they were given strength, they would lack spirit. If they had spirit, they wouldn't have a body. If they had an unparalleled body, they would lack intelligence. If they had superior intelligence, they wouldn't have the strength to truss up a chicken, and so on. The heavenly Tao didn't want to give the first sentient life form in this small universe too much of a cultivation realm. Therefore, it was still Jean Dan. However, the moment Jean Dan appeared, it shattered and disappeared. Therefore, the heavenly Tao understood that this body was no longer something that Jean Dan's cultivation realm could withstand. Lu Xiaoyi didn't even consider how to form his nascent soul. He forced the heavenly Tao to the point where it had no choice but to send him to form his nascent soul. Opening its mouth, it happily threw itself into the heavenly Tao. Lu Xiaoyi looked up at the sky with a smile on his face, waiting for the heavenly Tao to bestow upon him. Such an upper realm was unprecedented and would never be achieved in the future. Chapter 950. The heavenly Tao's rules were slowly circulating, never changing. If this was a normal heavenly Tao's rules with a strict system without any loopholes, he would definitely not have a good ending by forcing the heavenly Tao like this. At most, he could just shatter it and recast it. How much effort would that take? However, the current heavenly Tao was no longer the heavenly Tao of the past. The collapse of the 3 connate great Taos had caused a loophole to appear in this strict system that had been operating for millions of years. However, the cultivators of the lower realm could not feel the collapse of morality. Once fate was scattered, there were many monsters and monsters everywhere. Now that merit had collapsed, the loophole could no longer be concealed. A consciousness passed down. Your life includes reincarnation. In your previous life, you will no longer have the possibility of having children. Take this as a warning to the heavens. Lu Xiaoyi clasped his hands towards the sky and felt his essence, energy, and spirit tremble. They were mixed together, accompanied by a pain that seeped into his bones. This was also a small punishment from the heavenly Tao. However, the heavenly Tao was the heavenly Tao. It would not cut corners on the level of great Tao. The moment he formed his nascent soul, another consciousness of the heavenly Tao descended. What Tao is the nascent soul? In an instant, countless great Tao essences flashed through his mind. Not only were there the 5 elements in yin and yang, but there were also more than 30 other connate great Taos and countless postnatal great Taos, except for those 3 holes. The tragedy was that he was still not prepared to choose any great Tao until now. They all seemed suitable? But none of them seemed suitable? If that was the feeling, then none of them were suitable. Nascent soul! Lu Xiaoyi made his choice. So what if it was a connate great Tao? It was not the only one. Everyone could comprehend it, but there was one that was the only one. That was himself. The heavenly Tao did not hesitate. It seemed that in the most ancient era, there were also 4 existences who made the same choice. In the millions of years of cultivation history, there were also countless arrogant people who made the same choice. There would definitely be one in the future. His essence, energy, and spirit began to shatter, separate, and reassemble. During the entire process, those negative things, incomplete things, and malicious things were eliminated one by one. This included not only the power that the Vajra boy had penetrated into his body, but also some power in the Taoist inheritance that did not match him. Since it was the nascent soul, it was pure himself. Following the great Tao, but not hanging on a certain great Tao. It was both in and outside of the great Tao. This kind of cultivation philosophy was very popular in the early days of the cultivation world of the universe. Cultivators would prepare as much high-grade spiritual opportunity as possible for themselves. The highest grade spiritual opportunity was the jade clear spiritual opportunity. If they didn't have it, they could only use a large-scale spirit-gathering array to replace it. This was a process that purely tested the cultivator's wealth. Lu Xiaoyi was a bit of a weirdo. He had never cared about resources, but he had never lacked any. In the 200 years of the small universe, a lot of jade-clear spiritual opportunity had been produced during the formation of the small universe. Some of it had been eaten by the grand simplicity ancient spirit. There was a lot left, but he had never thought of exchanging it for anything outside. Instead, he kept it in the small universe, ready to use it at any time. Strand after strand, the belly of the 1-inch infant was like a bottomless pit. No matter how much it was filled, it would never be full. Only when the grand simplicity ancient spirit entered the infant's body did the infant start to not be like a funnel. With a foundation, it slowly began to fill up. After an unknown amount of time, the infant completely grew up. In that instant, it was as if the entire universe was in his hands, the world was in his hands. This was the initial stage of Yuanying. Back then, the slug had used this to pull him out of the star pulp. Essence, chi, and spirit were no longer separated. The entire body was one infant. With one infant in the body, the cultivator's ability had a qualitative improvement. Under normal circumstances, the cultivator would go through a painful body transformation process after forming the infant. But he didn't need to, because his body had been transformed before. Lu Xiaoyi was neither worried nor happy. He quietly observed his infant, and finally understood why this fellow was only an inch long. Me, the infant, was only an inch long. It was only one, but it had unlimited potential for growth. This was the price that humans had to pay for their own Tao. If he used some kind of Tao when forming the infant, whether it was the innate Tao or the acquired Tao, it would be a 3-inch infant. The 3-inch infant needed to be consolidated because it used external forces. The 1-inch infant didn't need it because it was himself. Lu Xiaoyi stood up. His transformation had come to an end, but the rusty little Lu's transformation was still ongoing. The grand simplicity meteorite core's transformation of the surrounding environment would continue, but its energy wasn't enough to turn the world upside down. It could only influence things subtly. Perhaps after thousands of years, the most basic spiritual vigor would be born here. Who knew? No matter what, the most basic spiritual vigor was beneficial to ordinary people. It wasn't enough to cultivate, but it was enough to extend their lifespan. He felt that all the discomfort in his body had disappeared, including the Buddhist power that he couldn't avoid after coming into close contact with the Vajra boy. He sighed and murmured softly. Tao seemed emotionless, but it had feelings. Buddhism was famous, but it didn't have a name. Innate and acquired Tao didn't matter. When the core reached the end, one would become an infant. Heaven seemed fair, but it was unfair. The sword was tangible, but it was intangible. With a thought, one abandoned the great Tao and dared to command the sword to Spirited Mountain. Chapter 951. Once he reached the nascent soul stage, 10 years had already passed. Reaching the nascent soul stage did not require such a long time. In fact, most of these 10 years were spent on the reconstruction of his body. Although it felt fast, it was actually a slow and meticulous process. Waving his sleeves, he left this place that was a paradise for him. In the future, it would be difficult for him to return to this small land. When a cultivator reached the nascent soul stage, their stage would be the stars and the universe. Who would be willing to be entangled by trivial matters in the bounded domain? The Zhou-Xian upper realm was the largest bounded domain in this part of the universe, but it was not the only bounded domain. To bounded domains, just like how coastal countries had their own territorial waters, bounded domains had their own territorial airspace. They were divided into internal territorial airspace, external territorial airspace, and radiation territorial airspace. Coastal countries had these because of their fishing resources, while cultivators did this because of their spiritual opportunity. In the void of the universe, there were countless clear purple spiritual opportunity, which was also the key to the survival of Yuanying cultivators and the advancement of their cultivation. To them, the little bit of spiritual opportunity from the spiritual stones could not satisfy their needs. Of course, it was also a form of protection for their own bounded domain. They could not wait for the enemy to attack their bounded domain before they discovered it. They had to expand this area to give themselves more room to maneuver. Just like how the fishes in the coastal waters were always the first to be caught, the clear purple spiritual opportunity in the internal and external territorial airspace was also the first to be harvested. With the size of the Zhou-Xian upper realm, its huge base of cultivators, and its hundreds of thousands of years of history, the spiritual opportunity around it had long been harvested. Not even a strand of hair was left. If they wanted to reap the rewards, they had to go further, the radiation territorial airspace, or even further. To perfected cultivators, they were not even willing to move around in this part of the universe. Because of the existence of the Zhou-Xian upper realm, there were many cultivators. Even if they searched hard, they could not get a suitable reward, so they would rather go further. In this part of the universe, it was the world of the Yuanying. They could not travel fast enough, so they could only plow through the surrounding airspace like locusts, not letting go of any clues. Especially in the recent 200 years, the number of Yuanying had skyrocketed, making it even more crowded. Because of the benefits and resources, because of the achievements in the future, in this part of the universe, it was no longer a competition between Buddhism and Taoism. It was also a competition between Buddhism and Taoism. Unless they were from the same sect, no one could care less about each other. There were no rules. The collapse began from the void of the universe. Because of the existence of the heaven and earth chessboard, the Zhou-Xian upper realm had a long buffer time, so the defense of the airspace had not been very focused. The universe was too big, so it was impossible to guard against all aspects. Now there were signs of the collapse of the Great Tao, so disputes and battles were commonplace from the radiation territorial airspace, which had become the new normal. The reason why they did not start fighting from the inner and outer airspace was that there was no spiritual opportunity in these airspaces, so there was no profit to be gained. Chaos was coming, and everyone was thinking for themselves. They knew that they might have caught up with the best or worst era of cultivation, so who would really care about those rules and regulations? The universe's cultivation world spent millions of years to establish such order, but it only took a few hundred years for it to collapse, which made people speechless. Outside the radiation territorial airspace of the Zhou-Xian upper realm, there were several realms in this part of the universe, but they were all mid-level cultivation celestial bodies, and their strength was not worth mentioning compared to Zhou-Xian. It was as if the fate and spiritual energy of this part of the universe were all occupied by Zhou-Xian. The whole part of the universe was the backyard of the Zhou-Xian cultivators, and they could travel freely without any restrictions. Generally, The Yuanying perfected cultivators who came to the door would fly out of the radiation territorial airspace. In order to obtain better rewards, there were even elites who stepped out of this part of the universe. Rewards often coexisted with danger. In the void of the universe, everyone understood this principle. The further one went, the more barren the environment of the universe, the more spiritual opportunity that had not been harvested. This was not a route that one person dared to take. At least for now, it required a group of people, and they had to be elites, to dare to walk out of this part of the universe. Cultivators used this method to understand the universe while accumulating cultivation resources for themselves. It was also because of this that there were all kinds of joys and sorrows, as well as killings and betrayals. In the vast starry sky, a huge comet streaked across the sky. The comet was so big that its head had already entered another part of the universe, and its tail was still sweeping across this part of the universe. Looking at it from afar, one could still see the shape of the comet. However, if one was in it, it was just a stream of cosmic dust and small meteorites. It looked scary from afar, but it was actually not that dangerous after entering it. This part of the universe was already out of the Zhou Xian upper realm. In this part of the universe, the cultivators of this part of the universe would not be polite to the people of Zhou Xian. It was just like how a farmer would treat his neighbor who came to steal sweet potatoes from his field, or how a fisherman would treat an outsider who came to fish in his own sea area. 5 figures were shuttling back and forth in the comet's tail. This was a small team, and all of them were Yuanying. They spread out in a fan shape and searched carefully, not letting go of any suspicious abnormalities. Xia Bingji was one of them. She had been a Yuanying for more than 100 years and was now in the middle stage of the Yuanying realm. She could be considered an old Yuanying realm cultivator, and had gotten rid of the embarrassment of being a newbie. Now, she was qualified to explore the void of the universe and search for spiritual opportunity. This small team was the Huangting Taoism's own team. It was led by 2 cultivators who were in the late stage of the Yuanying realm. They were very experienced and had strong combat abilities. Leading 3 other cultivators who were in the middle stage or early stage of the Yuanying realm like Xia Bingji, they formed a team to search for spiritual opportunity and explore the universe. This was the tradition of the Huangting Taoism. Unless the newly advanced Yuanying realm cultivators didn't leave Zhou Xian's territory, they had to be led by their senior brothers when they came out. Before the collapse of the Great Tao, an old Yuanying realm cultivator could lead 2 or 3 newbies. However, after the collapse of the Great Tao, the Huangting Taoism adjusted their arrangements. For example, their current team consisted of 2 old Yuanying realm cultivators, 2 middle-stage Yuanying realm cultivators, and 1 newbie. Such a team was enough to deal with the dangers in the ordinary universe. The Yellow Quartz sect had a strong foundation and was a large sect. Regardless of whether it was the inheritance or the foundation of the sect, it was incomparable to the sects in the ordinary domain. With such a team of power roaming the void, there was a great guarantee of safety. First, in the past 200 years, the surrounding senior brothers had all reached the Yuanying realm. After the collapse of the Great Tao, it was easier for the upper stage to be reflected in the large sects. This was because they didn't lack resources. What they lacked was the approval of the heavenly Tao. Now that the heavenly Tao had opened a gap, the result was naturally, she was actually one of the people who benefited from the collapse of the Great Tao. However, she believed that even if this didn't happen, she would have no problem reaching the upper stage. Every cultivator would think so, but this couldn't hide the fact that there were good and bad Yuanying realm cultivators among them. The void of the universe was a testing ground. There were no gentle and refined methods here, only life and death. Chapter 952. Danger was everywhere. But they had no other choice. Zhou Xian and the 9 great sects did not have a problem in terms of resources for the middle and low-level cultivators, but the problem now was with the high-level cultivators. How could there be so many Yuanying purple spirits to feed these hungry new Yuanying? Sex provided benefits for the cultivation of low and middle level cultivators, but there was very little provision for high level cultivators. In the universe, they were considered adults. Once their wings were strong enough, they should go out and hunt for food and not rely on others to feed them. Xia Bingji had a good master, but her master would also grow old. If she could not become a monarch, she would not have much time to protect her. She was also unwilling to accept her master's gift. Even if she could not help her master for the time being, at least she would not be a burden, right? She rejected Inya's suggestion to join the Yin clan's team and chose to go with most of the ordinary Yuanying because she knew that she could not always live under the protection of others. In the past 100 years, from the inner space to the outer space, to the radiation space, and finally out of the universe, she had experienced countless battles and grew through battles. Gradually, she became a qualified Yuanying spiritual master, a cultivator who could survive independently in the universe. Now, she was no longer a newcomer who needed protection. This was also the last time she would go on a mission with the old Yuanying in the sect to bring the newcomers to search for Yuanying. After this mission was over, she would also become an old Yuanying and help the other new Yuanying. Firstly, her growth was fast enough and she had a good battle record. Secondly, there were too many newcomers appearing too quickly. There were so many that the old Yuanying could not differentiate between them. Here! An old Yuanying gave a signal and the only newcomer in the team ran over. He was responsible for gathering the Yuanying. This was also a kind of training. Of course, in the end, the distribution of Yuanying had to be done according to their work. Those who were more experienced would get more. It was not good for the old to lead the newcomers without any benefits. The 5 of them lined up in a horizontal line. This way, they could make use of their advantage in numbers to increase the range of Yuanying. They were separated by hundreds of miles. This was not a short distance in the bounded domain, but in the universe, this distance was very close. Because there was no atmosphere, the distance in the universe and the bounded domain were two different concepts. No matter if it was moving or fighting. Xia Bingji stopped and carefully searched the corners of the star explosion dust with her spiritual sense while waiting for her companions to pick it up. Spiritual vigils were very cunning. If one wasn't an experienced cultivator, it would take a lot of effort to catch them. For example, she could now easily complete 1 round of harvesting. It was a skillful job. The more she harvested, the more experience she gained. It was just like how she felt nothing after killing many people. She originally thought that the higher a cultivator went, the easier it would be for them to focus on cultivation and understanding the nature of the universe. However, she didn't expect that the number of people she killed in the universe after she became a nascent soul was more than the number of people she killed in the hundreds of years she spent in Jindan. She remembered very clearly that when she was a law enforcement cultivator in the small front courtyard, she was responsible for arresting and killing villains. She had only personally killed 2 of them. This was her record for the entire Jindan period. But now, she already had 3 Yuanying records. It was also because of this that the church gave her the qualification of an old baby in advance. She was very proud. She had earned all of this herself. In the environment of the universe, killing was very difficult. Cultivators could escape without a trace. There were too many environments they could use. In such an environment, if they wanted to be sharp, they would need to have an extremely profound talent in fighting. In comparison, it seemed that other orthodoxies would be more agile. For example, body cultivators and swordsmen. This kind of place was the most suitable for swordsmen. They could kill people with their swords and come and go without a trace. She thought of that person again. It wasn't because of love, it was just a simple memory of a friend. Moreover, the gap between these memories was getting longer and longer. She couldn't even remember when was the last time she thought of that guy. Back then, he was famous in the upper realm of Zhou. Big and small eyes were gone. Among the remaining 4 people, he seemed to be the only one who didn't become a nascent soul, right? She had been out for a long time this time. Dozens of years had passed. She didn't know what would happen next. If she didn't hurry, there wouldn't be much time left. It was still so difficult under the premise that the heavenly Tao had relaxed the conditions for becoming a nascent soul. This didn't conform to his status in the group of Jing Dan and Zhou Xian. But in the end, it was normal. In the cultivation world, there were too many people that were shockingly talented in a certain realm and stood out from the crowd. In the end, they fell before the barrier of the upper realm in the end. It was as if all their luck had been used up. It was impossible for the heavenly Tao to always favor a certain person. The people that usually walked further were instead those people that were unknown to the public. So she never felt that her slightly ordinary appearance was useless. Instead, she was very satisfied with her situation. Cultivation was actually a competition of who lived longer and who walked further. What was a moment of glory worth? An urgent divine sense was transmitted over, and Xia Bingji swiftly put away her fluttering feelings. The 5 Golden Hall realm cultivators started to gather. They couldn't care less about Yu Qing, who just found them, because there was only one reason for such a warning. There was an unfamiliar cultivator approaching. Under most circumstances, a battle would occur. Because they were so far away from the universe, the possibility of encountering someone from the same sect was practically zero. In this place, they were most likely to encounter cultivators from their own universe. They would treat Huangting people as intruders and thieves. They weren't wrong to think this way. The problem was that the universe wasn't unique to any one sect. In the end, it was still a competition of whose fist was bigger. The Zhou Xian upper realm was very famous in the surrounding dozens of universes. It was known as the number 1 realm in the universe. It boasted, but it was indeed powerful. If the heavenly Tao hadn't collapsed, this kind of reverence might have continued. Most of the realms could only hide their slight dissatisfaction in their hearts. But now, everything was different. What had collapsed wasn't just the heavenly Tao, but also the human heart and the rules. There were 6 people who came, and they were slowly approaching. Xia Bingji was no stranger to this kind of encounter. She could feel that the other party didn't have good intentions, but because there were about the same number of people, there was nothing to be afraid of. The Zhou Xian upper realm wasn't a soft-footed shrimp that would flee upon seeing an enemy. The leader, senior brother Qian, was calm and composed. Even though they were one less person, the strength of Huangting Taoism cultivators wouldn't care about the difference of one person. Old rules. 10,000 miles as a path. Orchid Quartz potential. This was the preparation for a group fight. 10,000 miles sounded a little big, but the speed of cultivators in the universe couldn't be compared to in the realms. To them, 10,000 miles was only a few dozen breaths of time. This was the boundary of a group fight. They would try their best not to fly out of this boundary, or else they would lose the support of their fellow sect members. The Orchid Quartz potential was a loose method of sensing each other and providing support. It was between a scattered fight and a formation. It could fully display the cooperation between each other in battle. For example, if they needed to block, disassemble, provide support, surround and kill, and escape, they would be able to receive the support of their fellow sect members at the first possible moment. Of course, it was actually the safest to set up a formation, but it was too embarrassing for a dignified Golden Hall cultivator to set up a formation without understanding the other party's background. Chapter 953. Fellow Taoist in front, tell us your name. If you don't belong to our universe, you can't steal. This is the rule. Senior brother Qian answered. This is a comet. If it doesn't belong to a certain universe, how can it belong to us? The tail of the comet is here, and the head of the comet has appeared. It's a public resource of the universe, and everyone can take it. How can you overstep your boundaries? This kind of argument was meaningless. If the cultivators wanted to argue, they could find countless reasons. The reason why they were wasting their saliva was just to test each other. The native cultivators of their universe wanted to know if these pirates had the intention to return, while the Huangting people wanted to find out how tough the other party was. This comet was considered a rich mine in the nearby airspace. There were many Yuqing and Ziqing. It was rare to come across such a place. Since they had come across it, they wouldn't let it go. The other party didn't say much. With just one sentence, everyone understood each other's intention. Next, whether they stayed or left could only be decided by their fists. The 6 nascent soul stage cultivators lunged forward and were instantly engaged in a fierce battle. There was one more native cultivator, and the Huangting people were skilled in cultivation. For the time being, there wasn't a clear winner. However, it was obvious that the Huangting people still had some strength to spare. The cultivator opposite Xia Bingji used the Yuanying beast technique. It was different from the orthodox beast taming technique. It wasn't a living beast that was raised, but an energy body that was produced by extracting the essence of the beast. The advantage was that it was more loyal and obedient, but the disadvantage was that it wasn't flexible enough and didn't have its own intelligence. Their attacks were fierce. The 2 birds and 1 beast came and went like lightning. However, the current Xia Bingji was no longer the Xia Bingji of the past. When she was in Jindan, she focused on Tao and was addicted to solving problems calmly with her wisdom. However, she became Yuanying. After entering the universe, where life and death were intertwined, her previous concept of cultivation had turned from a dream into a reality. Her spells had also become sharp and aggressive. This was the change brought to her by the environment. She had to change. Even the direction of the spell had changed from being passive to being more active and aggressive. She still had a certain advantage in terms of cultivation and spells. This was expected, but at the same time, she felt that the other party didn't have a strong desire to win. After 100 years of wandering in the universe, she was very sensitive to battles. "Senior brother, the other party seems to have other plans? We must be on our guard." Senior brother Qian also felt it. He was also a decisive person, so he immediately ordered, "Everyone, gather around me!" His reaction was a little slow, or rather, it didn't matter if he reacted earlier or later. From another direction of the comet, another 7 auras appeared. They were surrounded. This was a simple strategy. If 13 cultivators appeared at the same time, then the Yellow Hall cultivators would surely retreat, and in this way, it would be extremely difficult to encircle them in a chase. But if 6 cultivators appeared first, then the Yellow Hall cultivators would surely think that they could fight them, and then the remaining 7 would outflank them. Senior brother Qian made a prompt decision. They couldn't afford the losses of a bitter battle. The sect had never asked them to risk their lives in such a situation. It was meaningless. After choosing a direction, the 5 Golden Hall realm cultivators started to break out of the encirclement, but the large net had already been formed, and if they wanted to leave without suffering any harm, then they had to pay a price. In the chaos, the Golden Court Yuanying rookie was the first to suffer. This was inevitable. The best strategy in a group battle was to strike at the opponent's weakness. Moreover, the current rookie Yuanying wasn't as strong as before, and their will and natural talent were generally on the mediocre side. The Yellow Hall cultivators formed a formation and charged. This was able to maintain their unity to the greatest extent, but it also caused them to lose their flexibility. The 4 of them worked together, and at the same time that they killed one person, they lost another companion, and only then were they barely able to charge out of the enemy's encirclement. The remaining 3 couldn't fight against 12 people, so with a whistling sound, the 3 of them split up and fled. Only by fleeing separately would they have a chance to escape. Continuing to gather together was courting death. The direction that Xia Bingji chose was towards the depths of the comet, and this was a choice that she had no choice but to make. Her absolute speed in the vast void was insufficient, and if she charged out of the comet, she would surely die. She could only rely on the cover of the meteor dust within the enormous comet to still have a glimmer of hope. It wasn't that she hadn't experienced the test before, and she chased after others and been chased by others as well. But there had never been such a great disparity in numbers. Now, she also understood that this comet should be a trap set up by the native cultivators of this universe. It was specially designed to trap outsiders, especially the cultivators from the Zhou Xian upper realm. Otherwise, it would be impossible for so many people to gather at once. This wasn't the normal rhythm of searching for spiritual opportunity. The comet was enormous, and it was hard not to notice it when passing by. Under such circumstances, they had been gathering spiritual opportunity inside the comet for more than 10 days, and yet they hadn't met anyone else. This already explains something. People die for wealth, and birds die for food. Spiritual opportunity was an irresistible temptation to cultivators, and how many of them would really risk their lives for the sake of safety? There were 5 cultivators following behind her, which was a little too many, but this was also in line with her usual treatment. In the cultivation world, Kun cultivators, especially outstanding ones, were always in high demand. Foundation establishment cultivators weren't hard to find, but Jin Dan Kun cultivators were very rare, and beautiful Yuanying Kun cultivators were simply like bright lanterns in the dark, attracting the attention of countless people. She was already used to it, so when she shuttled through the comet, her movements were as fast as lightning, and her strategy was also quite experienced. All kinds of illusions, deceptions, direction changes, and turns were used to perfection. If there were only 2 or 3 people behind her, she believed that she would have already escaped, but if there were 5 cultivators following closely behind, it was harder than ascending to the heavens. This was because no matter what trick she used, her opponents could simply divide their forces to deal with her. Due to the fact that the pursuers had a way to communicate with each other, and she couldn't complete the killing in a short period of time, she would always escape from 1 or 2 people, and not long after, another 5 people would gather behind her. This was the awkwardness of not having absolute speed. If one's speed was fast, one only needed to accelerate in a straight line. Not to mention 5 people, even if 500 people were chasing after her, it would be useless. The deeper she went into the comet, the denser the meteorites were. The collisions between the meteorites were another kind of danger to the cultivators who were flying in it. Of course, with the size of the comet, even if Xia Bingji had been running in it for more than 10 days, she was still far from escaping the range of the comet's tail. She was still far from the body of comet. This was the most dangerous time Xia Bingji had been in since she entered the void of the universe, but she didn't lose her mind. She was very clear that if she wanted to completely escape, she had to find a dangerous and complicated area. She couldn't pass through the comet's tail easily like now. A few days later, she found a magnetic field of rocks. This was a phenomenon unique to the inner part of the comet. In fact, the inner part of the comet wasn't always balanced. There were always some special places where the density of meteorites was higher, just like the place she found. Hundreds of thousands of meteorites of different sizes were colliding with each other under the effect of the magnetic field, pushing forward. Meteorites were constantly being thrown out, and new meteorites were constantly being sucked in. Under normal circumstances, Yuanying at her level would deliberately avoid such an environment, but now she had no choice. She didn't even have much time to observe. There were several times when she was almost caught, and she could only rush in and leave her fate to the heavenly Tao. Chapter 954. As soon as Xia Bingji went in, the 5 cultivators behind her were in a difficult situation. After some communication, they still followed her in. However, they did not attack in a fan-shaped formation, but in a row. This way, they could avoid unnecessary risks. They could also take care of each other, and they would not be attacked separately. Kun Xiu did not have this kind of ability. After a little entanglement, the cultivators behind would arrive. If it were another cultivator, they might not continue to chase. However, this woman was very attractive. She was the best cauldron for dual cultivation. If they caught her, they would all be able to use her. These people had been dissatisfied with the upper realm of Zhou for countless generations. Mortals hated the rich, and so did cultivators. It was just that they hid it deeper. After the rebel soldiers rushed into the county and burned and looted, there was one more thing they had to do, which was to enjoy the wives and concubines of the rich men. It was the same principle. The magnetic explosion area did not mean that they would die. There were some factors of luck, caution, judgment, and insight. If the cultivator's mind was as strong as iron and his strength was strong, he might not be affected. The key was that the magnetic explosion area was not big. It was a long spindle. If you flew along the vertical axis, you would be in danger all the time. However, if you changed your direction and flew in the cross-section, it was easy to escape. Xia Bingji could only fly along the vertical axis because she needed to be in enough danger to stop the pursuers behind her. In the magnetic explosion area, her speed was limited again. It was less than 30% of the normal space. Of course, the pursuers behind her were the same. However, their persistent pursuit also made her feel heavy pressure. She could not think of where she could run to after the magnetic explosion area was over. Flying like this, she came to the center of the magnetic explosion spindle. There was a huge yin-yang magnet with a diameter of hundreds of feet. A meteorite of this size was extremely rare in Huiwei. It was because of it that such a spindle-shaped magnetic explosion area could be formed around it. As soon as Xia Bingji got close to the meteorite, she immediately felt that she couldn't control her own body, as if she was attracted by a magnet. She quickly accelerated and crashed into the meteorite. In the face of danger, her mind was very clear. In the ancient books of Huangting Taoism, there was a description of this kind of meteorite. This kind of attraction was actually not fatal. It was just a process of being attracted and thrown out. It would be sucked in from one side, circling around the meteorite several times until it was fast enough to get rid of the attractive force, and then it would be thrown out from the other side. This was the perfect example of the attractive and repulsive characteristics of the meteorite. The only thing she had to be careful of was the danger of crashing into other meteorites when she was thrown out from the other side. She couldn't control herself here. In fact, it was the same for the pursuers behind her. In the process of being attracted and thrown out, a cultivator's personal ability couldn't play a role. Unless she gave up the circulation of her body's mana and gave up the secret of yin and yang in her body. Then she had another choice, which was to land on the meteorite. The reason why meteorite magnets could attract and repel human cultivators was because every human cultivator's body contained yin and yang. Thus, the magnetic field produced attracted and repelled forces. Of course, Xia Bingji wouldn't land. For a fugitive, stopping meant death. Naturally, her body crashed into the meteorite magnets like a stone. Then, when she was less than 10,000 feet away from the meteorite magnets, she began to circle diagonally. She felt that her speed kept increasing until it was fast enough for her to get away. As for how many circles she would circle, it depended on the strength of yin and yang in her body. This was the effect of the meteorite magnets. Any matter or creature with yin and yang attributes close to it would passively accept this process. This was also the only time when Xia Bingji had the time to observe her pursuers while she was escaping. Seeing that the fugitive had entered the effective range of the meteorite magnets, the 5 pursuers also rushed in without hesitation. They also knew the principle of the meteorite magnets. They couldn't attack when they were trapped in it because both sides couldn't help spinning fast. But what they had to guard against was that when the woman got enough acceleration to be thrown out, if they didn't get the same acceleration, they would probably lose the woman's trace. It was not dangerous. Then, they would circle together and see who got thrown out first. Who knows, maybe one of them would be left in the dust. Xia Bingji cast a forbidden spell on herself. The only use of this spell was that when her soul couldn't control her body would explode automatically. She miscalculated. Because in the rotation around the meteorite magnets, she wasn't the fastest. Even if she got in first, there must be a cultivator who was proficient in yin and yang in the enemy camp. Because of the interaction between the yin and yang energy and the meteorite magnets, they got a faster acceleration than her. In other words, when she was thrown out, there must be someone in front of her. This meant that her escape had come to an end. She couldn't struggle anymore. She didn't understand the magnetic explosion area, nor did she understand the meteorite magnets. But so what if she understood? It was only a matter of time before she was caught. This day would come. She had an epiphany. Since she could come to the void of the universe, cultivation began to become strange. It was not as beautiful as she imagined. Starry sky, friends, communication, everyone exploring the essence of the universe together. She was a little tired of it, but she had to persist because she had no other choice. It was good to end it now. Although her life wasn't stormy, it was still colorful. She had teachers, friends, stories, and men. It seemed that she didn't lack anything. She had always been lofty and aloof. She had always been a loner in her bones. On the path of cultivation, she had become more and more firm in her beliefs. Only when she recalled the time when she was a young girl who didn't care about worldly affairs was she taken advantage of. At that time, she was a little annoyed, but she didn't want to take revenge on that person. She just treated it as a punishment in her life. Later, she slowly got over it. Until now, it had become a story that she could recall. There were a lot of things, before and after she entered Tao. As she rotated around the meteorite magnets, it was like a review of her life. There were a lot of beautiful things, but there were also a lot of flaws. If she could do it again, what would she do? She would never be a slave to others. The 6 of them couldn't control themselves and rotated faster and faster around the meteorite magnets. Then, Xia Bingji seemed to see a glimmer of light in the corner of her eyes. It wasn't obvious, nor was it dazzling. It was like the most ordinary point among the stars in the universe. The light came from the meteorite magnets. Then, one of the pursuers suddenly stopped and fell down. A Tao disappearing celestial phenomenon was created. This was an inevitable phenomenon when a living creature lost its yin and yang after death. Without yin and yang, there would be no attraction or repulsion force. In surprise, Xia Bingji had already turned to the back of the meteorite magnets. She couldn't see what happened to the rest of the pursuers. She only knew that the Tao disappearing celestial phenomenon appeared one after another. Because of the position, she didn't even notice the suspicious glimmer at the beginning. When she finally turned around and saw the pursuers again, there were only 2 frightened cultivators who still couldn't control their bodies. In this short moment, they turned from wolves hunting for food to sheep being preyed on. This time, she finally saw it clearly. Another 2 glimmers flashed. After 5 Tao disappearing celestial phenomena, the magnetic explosion area finally calmed down. It was still the same. Chapter 955. Xia Bingji couldn't look at it because her speed was getting faster and faster. Even with her Yuanying level vision, she couldn't see clearly what was on the meteorite. She had a feeling that she would soon reach the speed of escape and leave this strange meteorite, the dangerous magnetic explosion area, and no one would be chasing her. This was a perfect escape. The only regret was that it was a bit strange. Who was it? Or a void beast? Or some kind of power of heaven and earth? Why was she left alone? Was it a coincidence? Should she go and say hello? At least she should know the truth. Did the other party welcome her? Would she disturb them? Would there be more problems? Xia Bingji resolutely shut off her yin and yang attributes and manipulated her inner secrets to become a human without yin and yang. This was her character. She knew that she could fly freely in the sky if she left, but she still couldn't get over the hurdle in her heart. Not knowing the truth was worse than death. Even though she might not be able to help him with anything in her entire life, she should at least be allowed to say thank you. Because she lost her yin and yang, her speed began to decrease and the meteorite no longer controlled the power of her body. However, she still didn't dare to act rashly. If she used the escape technique now, she couldn't hide her yin and yang. She would return to the old way of running in circles. So she could only wait for her speed to decrease. During this process, she carefully observed the meteorite. A diameter of several thousand feet was nothing to a nascent soul cultivator, but no matter how she looked at it, she couldn't see any signs of life. She didn't believe that it was a vision of heaven and earth. How could it choose sides? There was only one explanation. The strength of this existence was far above her. Maybe it was a monarch? A high-level monarch? Her speed was decreasing, and so was her height. Xia Bingji didn't have to worry about her life, but she was curious. She found that there were really a lot of Yuqing's spiritual vigor and Ziqing's spiritual vigor on this meteorite. Such a number would make the two upper sects turn against each other, but she wasn't tempted at all. She could vaguely guess that the reason why this powerful existence stayed here was for the vigor. She wouldn't take it if it wasn't hers. When she was less than 100 feet away from the meteorite, she suddenly activated her inner secret and leaped forward. The yin and yang attractive force instantly took effect on her body, but it did not matter. She had already grasped the protrusion of the meteorite. When her feet touched the ground, there was no distance, and the yin and yang attractive force no longer existed. While walking on the meteorite, she didn't dare to fly. She was afraid that she would have to turn in circles again. Therefore, she just walked and released her soul consciousness. She tried her best to be gentle and not provoke. She was someone who had almost died once. Although she didn't care much at the time, life was precious. She didn't want to go through it again. Along the way, the meteorite was not big. Soon, she noticed something. It came from a pothole. No wonder she couldn't see it in the air. Xia Bingji walked over lightly. What she saw was two sturdy buttocks and a mumbling lump in the middle. A person was lying on the ground with his back facing her, mumbling to a few wisps of jade pure spiritual vigor. Good baby, good baby, good baby, come to daddy's hand. Xia Bingji's eyes turned sour. She wanted to cry, but she held it back. She finally understood that there was no such thing as help in the world for no reason. If there was, then there must be someone who cared about you. It was just a coincidence. Don't just stand there. Come and help me. These little guys are too wary of me. Damn it. I'm such a good person. Aren't I worthy of being close to them? Xia Bingji smiled through her tears. Since it was this guy's, she didn't feel any pressure to share some of it. In this world of cultivation, she didn't even want to accept the spiritual vigor of her closest master and refused the help of her best friend Yinya. However, she just wanted to share some of it with this guy without any psychological burden. When did you come out? How come I didn't know? The two of them had a big harvest on the meteorite. Xia Bingji felt relaxed. With this guy beside her, there was nothing to worry about. She didn't need to run away. This was the most competent fighter she knew. When they were in Jindan, he killed people in the same realm as he killed chickens. Now he was in Yuanying, nothing had changed. She finally believed what he said. My talent is to kill people. It was good to have such a friend in this chaotic world. 30, 40 years? I can't remember clearly. To be honest, this is the bad thing about cultivation. As you cultivate, you don't know how old you are. Lu Xiaoyi complained. Xia Bingji sighed. This meant that not long after she came to the void of the universe, this guy became a nascent soul. How could someone like him not become a nascent soul? With the collapse of the Great Tao and the emergence of all kinds of monsters, it needed someone like him who was good at stirring up trouble. Do you mind if I take some of your spiritual vigor? Xia Bingji smiled. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. It's better to come at the right time than early. Whenever I meet you guys, I'm always the one at a disadvantage. Take it, take it. Let's split it in half. Everyone is happy. Xia Bingji's smile grew. Where are those people from? What realm? Haven't you met them before? Lu Xiaoyi simply said. I don't know. I don't have the time to ask about their origins. Before? Yes, I have met some before, but I don't know if they are in cahoots. The universe is so big. How can I tell? Xia Bingji shook her head. Aren't you a little too careless in killing people? You don't even know who they are. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Do you know how to talk to your food while eating? This time, it was Xiao Bingji's turn to be speechless. When this guy spoke now, that feeling of looking down on the world could not be suppressed. Could it be that in his eyes, other Yuanying was just a piece of rice? But she could not refute because in his hands, that was really the case. Lu Xiaoyi looked at her. This girl was getting more and more interesting, but he would not ask for anything. He knew what this girl was thinking. As a cultivator, he had to respect the choices of others, and also himself. It was not bad to have such a friend. He had been out in the universe for 35 years. Before that, he had returned to the shaking shadow realm to train for 10 years. His 1-inch nascent soul did not need to be consolidated. It was impregnable, but his sword technique system needed to be rebuilt. This was because he now had 7-et, an amazing flying sword. After reaching the Yuanying realm, many things became simple. With the immersion of his sword techniques for hundreds of years, he had already formed his own sword technique philosophy that was different from any other system. Yuanying level sword techniques, whether it was from the shaking shadow realm, Xiao Yao, or Xian Yuan, could only be used as a reference for him. His foundation was his own philosophy. Just like his Yuanying, his nascent soul. Because of his nascent soul, his sword. Chapter 956. Lu Xiaoyi cultivated in the shaking shadow realm for 10 years and re-established his own swordsmanship system. Then, after reporting to carefree travel, he leaped out of the Qi layer and arrived at the void of the universe that he dreamed of. In all of history, there was probably no other Yuanying who was as familiar with the universe as he was. This was because he had been floating in the universe for who knew how many years. Other people entered the universe to explore the unknown, but he came to the universe to go home. Thus, other people needed a long time to familiarize themselves with the universe, including the various astronomical phenomena and the countless stars. Lu Xiaoyi, on the other hand, only deepened his understanding of the universe. Because of his celestial technique, he was like a fish returning to the water or a bird flying into the sky. Even the problem of locating oneself in the universe, which was extremely difficult for other cultivators, was easy for him. He could already sense tens of thousands of stars, just like tens of thousands of satellites, which could help him locate himself with great precision. He could locate himself, Zhou Xian, and this part of the universe. Even in the complicated astronomical phenomena, he was not wrong at all. The only exception was the location of the fifth ring, which was too far away and beyond the range of his senses. When ordinary Yuanying left the universe for the first time, they would usually make a few rounds in the inner space to familiarize themselves with everything in the universe. They would know how to find their way, how to fight, how to send messages, and how to communicate. The bolder ones would fly to the outer space, and that was all. If they went further, they would have to familiarize themselves with the universe for more than 10 years or even dozens of years. They would also have to be led by their seniors before they would go to the outer space. On Lu Xiaoyi's first trip, he directly left the universe where Zhou Xian was located. He ignored carefree travel's warning and went alone. He disdained to team up with others. This was not arrogance, but confidence. He was just going home. Did he need to be so careful? He had gone to many places and was a little reluctant to go back. Of course, it was also for the spiritual opportunity. Due to the awkwardness of every time he went to the upper realm, he decided that this time, he would first raise his cultivation level in the Yuanying realm, and then cause trouble. The 1-inch baby was a big eater, and his small world that could produce spiritual opportunity had already merged with little rusty continent. It could no longer produce spiritual opportunity, so he could only try his luck in the void of the universe like others. Others were trying their luck, but he wasn't. He could always find the place with the most abundant spiritual vigor. Many astronomical phenomena did not require him to enter and search carefully. He knew very well where these little things liked to appear and where they were suitable to grow. This was because he had once been like them, drifting alone in the universe for many years. until they discovered this huge comet. There was also awkwardness. For example, he was now a person without virtue or luck. In the Taipu realm, he could easily capture the Taipu ancient spirit. Although he did not have much affinity with these sensitive little things, he was still above the standard. But now that he had become a nascent soul, these little fellows looked at him as if they had seen a ghost. Their most primitive spiritual intelligence guided them to automatically avoid people like him who had no virtue and no luck. Therefore, it was easy to find spiritium, but it was very troublesome to collect them. Senior sister, you didn't come out alone, did you? With all due respect, this place might be a little far for you. Xia Bingji sighed. How could that be? The 5 of us came out together and were ambushed in Huwei. 2 of us died and 3 of us escaped. My speed was not fast enough, so I could only run in Huwei. I don't know what happened to the other 2 senior brothers. She did not ask this fellow to help her save people. It was not that she was cruel to her fellow disciples and did not save them, but the universe was vast. She had been running for more than half a month. How could she find those 2 senior brothers? Not to mention him alone, even if there were dozens of true monarchs here, the universe was vast, and there was not even a direction. Where could they find them? It was her life, she could only pray for her own fortune. Lu Xiaoyi said seriously. The universe outside the domain is getting more and more chaotic, it's better not to run around. If you don't have a place to go for the time being and are not in a hurry to return to Zhou, help me collect spiritium here. I guarantee that you will be able to collect more spiritium in a year than you can collect in 10 years. And, of course, I am also doing it for myself. It is really awkward for me to catch this thing. Xia Bingji stared at him. Is this a request? Lu Shui spread his hands. No, it's a request. Xia Bingji smiled. Although she wouldn't continue to be with this man, he was still the only man in her life. Women, even if they were in the nascent soul stage, would have a psychological advantage over their men. This was a subconscious thought, and they wouldn't admit it verbally. I will find spiritium myself. You are so clumsy at the side that these spiritium do not dare to come out. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Professional things should be done by professionals. Senior sister, you collect spiritium. I will go outside and take a look. Xia Bingji was very vigilant. What are you going to do? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. This woman, although she had been in the universe for a long time, she was still not used to the real game of the universe. Even if she thought that she was a veteran, in Lu Xiaoyi's eyes, she was still a newbie. There are 2 things you need to pay attention to. Like you said, there are a total of 12 cultivators surrounding you. Yes, 5 of them were killed, so there are 7 left. Whether these people can catch up with your 2 senior brothers or not, they will come back here in the end because the comet is their biggest target. Xia Bingji nodded. Yes, they will follow the comet's tail. Maybe these 5 people left some kind of mark when they were chasing me. Lu Xiaoyi continued. The comet has been moving and its speed is not slow. Moreover, I know that the comet's tail is sweeping through a powerful region in this universe. In other words, we are unknowingly approaching their nest. Senior sister, you need to pick up the spiritium faster. 1 year. We can only safely stay in this comet for 1 year. Once the time is up, whether there is a warning sign or not, we must leave. Xia Bingji nodded silently. Although she didn't know how this guy was able to grasp the situation of the universe like the back of his hand, this guy had too many secrets, and too many mysteries. She knew that he wasn't bluffing. In this aspect, this guy's reputation was very good. Are you going to sweep through the outside world? There may be a lot of them. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Sending people to reincarnation is my profession. It has nothing to do with the number of people. You know that I am not used to being passive. The key to being able to kill these 5 people so easily was that they did not know about the meteorite magnet, and did not know about my existence. It may not be the same for another group of people. The meteorite magnet is not a big secret among the many astronomical phenomena in the universe. If they really surround me, I can only run away. Xia Bingji's heart skipped a beat. The last time she heard him talk about running away was in the sea of clouds in the red hills of Zhouxian. The last two people to run away. He was still the same person who did not mean what he said. As long as this guy was here, she knew that she was safe. Chapter 957. Lu Xiao used the repulsive force of the meteorite to project himself. Actually, he still had some things that he didn't tell Xia Bingji. For example, there were perfected monarchs here. Since there was so much spiritual opportunity, how could it escape the senses of the perfected monarchs? In the void of the universe, no one would talk to you about bullying the weak. Previously, they might still be putting on airs and keeping a straight face. However, once the Tao collapsed, they would immediately reveal their true colors. Killing the yuanying of one's enemy was equivalent to killing the enemy's hope, even if the hope was infinitely small. His speed was strengthened in the void of the universe. Tens of thousands of stars were pulled without any blind spots. His body's abnormal strength allowed him to display the characteristics of the sword to the extreme in the void of the universe. It was as if he could teleport endlessly. This was the biggest reason why he dared to boldly walk out of the universe. It wasn't just his sword techniques. In the void of the universe, running was the way of the king. The entire cultivation system that he had established when he was in the foundation establishment stage only showed its true power when he was in the yuanying. Thankfully, he survived and didn't die in front of the yuanying. The direction of the search was in the direction of the Huwei. He was very clear that these native cultivators only had one goal: to kill the people of Zhouxian. Their main goal was still to find spiritual opportunity. Their own cultivation was always the most important. This was the principle. Therefore, one could only follow the tail of the comet and walk in the direction where there was more spiritual opportunity. It was impossible to go in the opposite direction and walk from the middle of the comet to the tail where there was less spiritual opportunity. This was the subconscious behavior of cultivators. He only needed to guard against the cultivators who came from the Huiwei. As for the perfected monarchs, they might not be interested in the Huiwei's Yuqing. They might be more willing to find the Ziqing in the Huiwei. That was what they really needed. Time passed by as the two worked together. Xia Bingji focused on gathering spiritual opportunity. Although the meteorite was small, it was densely packed with spiritual opportunity. She had her work to do. Lu Xiao, on the other hand, was sweeping back and forth in the periphery. Not only did he sweep the remaining 7 people, but he also swept the other strange guests, and even the people of Zhouxian. When you came to the void of the universe, you couldn't be merciful and think that the cultivators of Zhouxian should be your allies. This was very childish. If any other cultivator were to discover the rich spiritual opportunity on the meteorite, they would definitely be tempted. Rather than being forced to kill someone, it would be better to kill them directly. If he was alone, he might not have made such a cruel choice. However, if there was a woman dragging him down, he had to ensure the absolute safety of the two of them. He would not place his hopes on someone else's moral integrity. This was the difference between him and Xia Bingji. It was the difference in professionalism. He gave them a deadline of 1 year, but this was just a judgment. The situation could change at any time. 8 months later, Xia Bingji felt that someone was approaching the meteorite. The next moment, Lu Xiaoi descended from the sky. "Senior sister, how much spiritium have you collected?" Xia Bingji threw over a storage ring. 2,100 jade purity and 180 strands of purple purity. Your share is here. Are you leaving? It hasn't even been a year. Lu Xiaoi nodded. I'm leaving. The frequency of foreign cultivators appearing was too high. If it was just for a battle, of course, we could still fight. However, if it was for spiritual gathering, there was no need to be entangled. It seems that the location of this comet has been spread. A large number of cultivators are rushing here. The natives and the people from Zhouxian are among them. I hate eating with others. Let's find another place. The universe is so big. There is no need to hang on a tree. You like to eat alone. Where are we going? Are we going to the depths of the comet? Or are we leaving the comet? Xia Bingji had no objection. She was very clear about this guy's temperament. If he was alone, he would definitely stay here and fight with others. The reason why he wanted to leave now was because of her. In a battle in the universe, the advantage of having more people was great. However, the prerequisite was that they had to be able to take care of each other. If one of them was obviously weaker, 1 plus 1 would be less than 1. She was finally clear about her own position. In fact, it did not matter if her combat strength was average. It was not where her interest lay. Why force it? Why not work hard on her own specialty and leave the fighting to those who were talented in it? There was nothing to be ashamed of. Being independent did not mean that she had to be independent in everything. She only needed to take care of the parts that were within her ability in the huge war chariot that was the Huangting Taoism. Lu Xiaoyi explained. We can't stay here in the meteorite magnet. It's too inconvenient to go in and out. It's not easy for our opponents to come in. It's also troublesome for us to go out. The deeper we go into the comet, the higher the possibility of bumping into a true monarch. Well, I'm still not strong enough to fight against them. My arms and legs are so small. Let's just leave the comet and go to the universe. Xia Bingji covered her mouth and laughed. That's good. I thought you didn't even care about true monarchs now. The two of them packed up and began to float, allowing the meteorite magnet to push them. They gradually accelerated and spun until they reached a speed where they could leave. Lu Xiaoyi naturally hugged Xia Bingji's waist. The woman did not struggle. She knew very well that Lu Xi was worried that she would not be able to control her flying posture perfectly if the two of them were thrown out by the acceleration. So, he was fully in control. It did not matter. It was not as if he had not hugged her before. After 3 rounds, they felt that their speed had reached the extreme. Then, their bodies became light and the restraint was gone. The next moment, the two of them shot out like fragments from a star explosion. Xia Bingji only felt that there were countless meteorites in front of her. Such a speed of escape was completely beyond her imagination. If she was careless and collided with a group of meteorites, even someone as strong as Yuanying would not be spared. How to maintain speed and avoid collision while flying in a group of meteorites was a test of a cultivator's ability. She might not even pass in this aspect, but now she knew how a top student operated. Just a hair's breadth away, dancing on the tip of a knife. Countless times she thought that she was going to collide with a meteorite, but in fact, there were countless times where she was scared but not in danger. When she began to feel that her speed was gradually slowing down, she had already left the magnetic storm area of the spindle and started to fly rapidly in the space of the comet tail. After experiencing the density of the magnetic storm area, such a dense group of meteorites in the space of the comet tail was nothing at all. Controlling the sword. For the first time, she felt the horror of a top swordsman controlling the sword. There was no way to fight. There was no way to aim. It was difficult to lock on with divine sense. Xia Bingji reminded herself that when she returned, she would have a good talk with her master about this problem. She would try to get her master's support on the relationship with Yaoying Sword Palace and Xiao Yaoyu. She would try her best to avoid offending this guy on the level of the sect. Who would be able to survive in the universe after offending such a person? Chapter 958. P.S. I'm lying in front of the computer, trying my best to type. I can only see 2 pieces. I'm mumbling to myself. Monthly subscription, come to this old man's bowl. 10 days later, the two rushed out of the comet and disappeared into the vast universe. 5 rings, Dome Peak. Swords were coming and going. It was getting busier and busier. For hundreds of years, the sword vein was getting more and more prosperous. In fact, it wasn't just the sword vein. The entire cultivation world was thriving. The orthodox Taoists and Buddhists were even more prosperous than the sword vein. This wasn't normal. The Jin Dan cultivators were ushering in their best era. But for the high-level cultivators, they saw more hidden dangers. The probability of reaching the nascent soul realm had almost doubled. The reason behind this was very thought-provoking. For Xianyuan, including the 5 rings, even if the Yuanian cultivators were in a state of eruption, their demand for resources was not urgent. This was because they had been snatching for thousands of years. They flew and snatched all the way. Their resources were extremely abundant. It was as if they already knew that the end of the world was coming. Because the boundaries were not fixed, the 5 rings was always drifting. So there was always a new airspace waiting for them. It was not like Zhou Xian, where the inner and outer airspace was empty. Their inner and outer airspace was always changing. This gave the 5 rings Yuanian a great advantage in gathering spiritual opportunity. The newcomers didn't need to fly too far to harvest spiritual opportunity. For the time being, the problem of resources was not a headache for the higher-ups of the 5 rings. What they were worried about was an unforeseen event that even they couldn't control. On this day, the Crow Peak was full of heroes and supremes. Those who stayed at the mountain gate were all here. They were all silent, as if they were waiting for something? Sun God Supremes Guan Du, Qiu Bai, and Xing Shi were at the head. Below them were a large group of people, including Inner Sword Supremes Zhizhong, Gong Qing, and Le Feng. Outer Sword Supremes Gong Yao, Shou Jiong, and Ray Supremes. This was very rare for the Xianyuan swordsmen, who had always been plundering and roaming the universe for a living. This was a trend. Since the collapse of merit, the Supremes began to return. It was not just the Xianyuan sword faction. The collapse of the Tao was something that all cultivators in the universe could feel. Like a message to the cultivators who received it, sword vein, Taoists, and Buddhists were all the cultivators. This was a major event that was related to the foundation of the cultivation world in the universe. Of course, it was also closely related to each orthodoxy. When the epoch changed, there would be a rise and a fall. Countless ambitious cultivators bared their fangs. For example, a top sword vein like Xianyuan, of course, they had to find the most suitable path for themselves. They could not afford to be careless. Information gathered from all directions, from the orthodox Taoists to the half-immortals. But there was one thing. There was no news from the immortal court, not even a word or a hint. It was not only the ancestors of Xianyuan who were like this, but also the ancestors of the 3 pure ones. This strange silence made everyone feel uncertain. They could only guess. Fortunately, the top forces of the 5th ring had deep foundations in the half-immortals level. These cultivators who were closest to the immortal court were the closest to the truth. The swordsmen were very silent. In this series of changes, the Xianyuan sword faction was once again pushed to the forefront of the storm. Because the source of the change of the Tao was with them. If the epoch changing was a curtain, then the one who pulled it open was the Xianyuan swordsman. Regardless of whether they admitted it or not, this was what everyone thought. What did this mean? It meant that during the epoch changing, the sword vein would either soar to the sky or fall forever. Therefore, although they were silent, there was an indescribable surge of power in this silence. This was a great era. The Crow ancestor had given them a chance to stand on the stage of the entire universe. How would they express themselves? The future was bright and the path was full of twists and turns. The pressure was as great as a mountain. They had already waited on Crow Peak for a whole year. None of them said anything. If the change did not appear, they would continue to wait like this. It was not only the Dome Peak. The 3 pure ones Longhuan Cave, the Supreme Amethyst Mountain, and Sungha's Xinyu Lake also had a large number of perfected monarchs gathering there. Suddenly, the universe became silent. This was something that only cultivators and those who were connected to the heavenly Tao could sense. Foundation Establishment Jin Dan could sense it. The sharp ones could even sense it. However, they did not know why. Only grand cultivators, especially perfected monarchs, could make an accurate judgment. In the momentary silence, something shattered. It was one of the rules of the Tao. It's the great void. Gong Yao sighed. After morality, destiny, and merit, another connate Tao shattered. It had only been a short 300 years since the fragment of merit. The great void was Qi, the main body of the Bayan. The nether heart returned to the great void. Heaven and earth had the same lifespan. 10,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 300 years ago. Is the collapse of the Tao accelerating? A perfected monarch murmured. Guan Du reprimanded. He had to correct some of the perfected monarch's thoughts. Otherwise, they would be confused by the collapse of the Tao and uncontrollably do some inexplicable things. It's not accelerating. It's disorder. The collapse of the Tao can happen every few years or decades. The heavenly Tao universe cannot withstand continuous upheavals. This is the foundation. A few days ago, the unspeakable place sent a warning. It's because it's afraid that we will lose our minds because of this. In the future, the collapse of the Tao will take at least 200 to 300 years. It's the norm. Zhizhong was a little depressed. Great void. Is there a Tao realm direction in my Xianyuan sword vein that's great void? Anyway, I know that there isn't an internal sword vein. Gong Yao, do you have an external sword vein? Gong Yao was also very depressed. There seems to be one or two, but I'm not sure. The uncertainty of the Yuanying Tao realm direction during the nascent soul stage was not due to his negligence as the pavilion master of the Soaring Heaven Pavilion. In fact, many cultivators did not have a complete grasp of their Tao realm direction during the nascent soul stage. Yuanying was only a relay station on the Tao realm, not the final destination. It's just that many cultivators would eventually fall at this relay station. The direction of the Tao realm could still be changed after the Yuanying Tao realm. Many of the perfected monarchs present had experience in this aspect. Guan Du waved his hand. No matter. Spread the news. Let everyone choose for themselves. If there's a need, they can go outside and try their luck. A perfected monarch sighed. The universe is vast. How difficult is it to find a fragment of the Tao realm? Sigh. This news was passed down from the unspeakable place. It was not only from the Xianyuan half-immortals, but also from the three pure supreme half-immortals. There was only one core. The collapse of the Xiantian Tao would cause countless fragments to scatter. Those who were able to obtain them would be able to greatly help cultivators in comprehending the direction of the Tao. It could also be said that the seeds were spreading everywhere. This was a continuation and inheritance of the Xiantian Tao. The great Tao of merit 300 years ago was like this. At that time, almost all the monks flew into the universe as long as they could fly. There were no Buddhists in the Five Rings, so the Taoists were not very interested. To the orthodox Taoists, if they obtained merit, it meant that they had to cultivate again. Moreover, it was not realistic. Without the foundation of the great Tao of merit, even if they saw a fragment of the great Tao of merit in the universe, they would be helpless and unable to fuse with it. Chapter 959. To fuse with the Tao fragments, one had to go to the void of the universe. In other words, the threshold was Yuanying. This was different from the destiny of morality 10,000 years ago. Above the Qingwei heaven, there was the Daluo heaven. There were 5 Daluo golden immortals and 8 Das, which were morality, destiny, 5 elements, time, and karma. It was the innate of the innate. When such innate Das collapsed, they would not just stay in the void of the universe. Instead, they would penetrate everything and seep into the world. Even Qi refinement and foundation establishment cultivators, mortals, mountains, rivers, nature, and all kinds of things could be favored by the Tao. It was the Tao of Daluo golden immortals. Education without discrimination, salvation for all living beings. Morality 10,000 years ago was like this. It dispersed into the mortal world and no one knew where it ended. The destiny 1,000 years ago was the same. However, it was more direct and directly affected many people. The merit after that was no longer the Tao of Daluo golden immortals. Therefore, it stopped in the universe and did not enter the Qi layer. If one wanted to pursue it, he had to go out and find it himself. It was the same for the void now. This was also the form of most of the innate Taos in the future after they collapsed. Cultivators with this Tao direction had a chance to obtain the fragments of the Tao in the universe and strengthen their own Tao state. However, there were also disadvantages. Guandu reminded, "There is one thing that I have to make clear to the perfected ones. The direction of their Tao state can actually be changed. With experience, opportunities, and understanding of the universe, they will gradually find their true direction in the long time of cultivation. Just like the Crow ancestor, when he became a nascent soul, the direction of his Tao state was the 5 elements. In the end, he merged with morality. Everything is possible. However, I suspect that if a cultivator finds such a Tao fragment in the universe and fuses with it, it will be difficult for the cultivator to change the direction of his Tao in his life. Although there is not enough time to prove my idea, the Tao of heaven is full of losses. If you gain something, you will lose something. This has never changed." The perfected ones nodded. Guandu's words were very reasonable. Therefore, if a cultivator encountered such a Tao fragment, whether it was compatible or not, it would be a test of their Tao heart. Some true monarchs thought even further, and Zhou Jiong said, "Is there a possibility that after a cultivator fuses with the fragments, he can continue walking until the end of the era when he truly fuses with the innate Tao? Then will he still be him? Or is it another form of rebirth of the previous great Tao master?" This was a heavy question, so heavy that even true monarchs like them didn't dare to think about it. What level was a Khanate Tao Lord at? The difference between them and the other party was like heaven and earth. There was at least a difference of 6 or 7 realms. If the Khanate Great Tao collapsed, what about the golden immortals who were the Tao Lords? Was it really dead? Or had he transformed into a myriad of fragments of the Great Tao and was ready to make a comeback at any moment? Start over after the change of the era? Countless seeds were scattered throughout the universe, and there was bound to be one that would blossom and bear fruit. Then, was this a way for innate Tao masters to avoid the calamity of the epic change? No one would remind them of these things. However, Supremes were no longer ignorant rookies in the cultivation world who didn't know the dangers of cultivation. They were familiar with the traps in the cultivation world. To some extent, they could do some unimaginable things. There was no reason that those with the highest status in the world couldn't do it. Who would be willing to cultivate to become someone else in the end? Taoist Xingshi, who had been silent all this time, spoke up. He had just returned from the deep space of the universe and had his own unique view of everything that had happened. Cultivators cannot try because of fear. Danger is the motivation for cultivators to move forward. Sticking to the rules will never lead to success. From the moment you step onto the path of Tao, danger is everywhere. What if you encounter a fortuitous encounter? What if it's a trap? Will there be repercussions after fusing with a spiritual object? What if you're controlled? Will there be a secret door in the cultivation technique that the higher-ups of the sect use? Wait, there's no such thing as safety in cultivation. Being afraid of becoming the incarnation of a Khanate Tao master after Tao integration is just groundless fear. You have to know that even if someone has the possibility of becoming a Khanate Tao master, in the process of becoming stronger, they'll be an extremely important help to Xian Yuan. Moreover, most people won't be able to reach that step at all. Even if they reach that step, a Xian Yuan that's entrusted by a Khanate Tao master is still much better than the 3 pure ones and the supreme ones, right? Therefore, there's no point in thinking about this question. If you want to merge, then merge. Then, try to go down and see when you reach that step. Guandu nodded. Senior brother Xingshi is right. Don't think about what kind of trap the Khanate Tao master has set for the lower realm cultivators. If he wants to trap you, you won't be able to escape. Therefore, the most important thing is to take all the benefits first, and then think about other things later. The three pure ones are disdainful of Tao fragments, and even spread rumors that this might be a backdoor left behind after the Khanate Tao master collapsed. A conspiracy. Actually, it's just to make others suspicious so that they can take it for themselves. Therefore, don't worry about others. If you feel that this Tao is fated with you, then go and pursue it. I actually hope that in the future, when the epoch changes, there will be a dozen or so Tao masters from Xianyuan among the 36 Khanate Taos, even if you won't be you at that time. True Lord Qiubai laughed. A dozen or so? Senior brother, you really dare to dream. Don't look at how our five-ring Tao master is full of talents. When the time comes, even one of them will be a great fortune. The universe's myriad realms aren't just empty words. There are many realms that don't think that the five-ring Tao master is that far away. The three young gods set the tone as they chatted. This was also the style of Xianyuan. Is it suitable for me? I'll swallow it and digest it first. If I really can't do it, I'll drag it out. This is the typical logic of bandits. If the Tao collapses, then I must fight for it. This is the right way to cultivate. A true lord passed down this message to the countless Yuanying swordsmen who were waiting at the dome. Then, after dragging it out, a few swordsmen weakly flew out of the dome and ascended into the void. Qiubai sighed. So we were talking for nothing. There are only a few of them. I'm afraid there's a higher chance of them going out to search for the Tao Master. The great Tao of the Great Void is really not fated with our sword vein. It's no wonder. If it was the Tao of slaughter and destruction, the five elements, yin and yang, look, the dome would probably be empty. The three of them were still very gratified. Although they couldn't stop the Yuanying from going into the void to try for the Great Void fragment, the disciples were able to remain calm in front of the Great Tao. This was a sign of their firm state of mind. For example, none of the true lords present were willing to go out and try their luck. This was because they didn't think that this was their luck. Between greed and perseverance, cultivators had to make a choice. These true lords all chose to follow their hearts without exception. They didn't chase after the great Tao that collapsed. This was the reason why the Xianyuan sword faction stood tall in the cultivation world. Chapter 960. Lu Xiaoyi traveled through the universe with Xia Bingji. They didn't go far away from Zhou Xian, but circled around Zhou Xian with an extremely large radius. This radius was even out of that part of the universe. He wasn't arrogant enough to think that he could travel freely in the universe. If he went too far, it would be very troublesome to go back. In the universe, there wasn't only one celestial phenomenon. There were countless celestial phenomena and countless opportunities. As long as you were willing to take the risk, you could always find a place where spiritual opportunity grew. The two worked hard in the universe for a full 10 years and reaped countless rewards. During this period, they killed people and were hunted down by others. The spiritual opportunity in the storage ring gradually swelled up. For Lu Xiaoyi, when he first reached Yuanying, his 1-inch nascent soul could only swallow a wisp of jade-clear spiritual opportunity every 10 days. Now, it was swallowing a wisp of jade-clear spiritual opportunity every day, just like Xia Bingji's nascent soul. However, Xia Bingji was now a 5-inch nascent soul, which could be considered as a mid-stage Yuanying. He, on the other hand, was still a little short of a 3-inch nascent soul. This was the consequence of being a nascent soul. Without the support of the Tao realm, there would always be a lack of support. He had already worked very hard in his cultivation. His cultivation talent was already terrible to begin with, and he found himself an even more troublesome 1-inch nascent soul. The jade bottles are almost used up. I didn't expect to have such a big harvest this time. It's enough for me to use for a few decades. Xia Bingji's tone was filled with joy, but Lu Xiaoyi could hear the hidden meaning in her words. She wanted to go back. He had been out for nearly 40 years, and Xia Bingji had been out for even longer, a full 60 years. Although the universe was the home of cultivators, humans would never forget the feeling of being down to earth. Cultivation required balance, and couldn't be so tense all the time. Just like Jade Clear's spiritual opportunity, one couldn't eat every day without eating. One had to eat on an empty stomach. It's time. After we finish searching this planet, I estimate that it won't take more than 10 days for us to return. Lu Xiaoyi made a decision. Xia Bingji looked at him suspiciously. If you don't cause any trouble, will you go back like this? Lu Xiaoyi was very innocent. Senior sister! From the bottom of my heart, I love peace. He hoped that the universe would be harmonious and mankind would be in good health. Killing people is self-defense. I had no choice. In the last few days, Xia Bingji obviously became lively again, which made Lu Xiaoyi sigh in his heart. This was the root of every human being. No matter how far away they were, how long they had been away, no matter how high their cultivation was, no matter how tempting the rewards were, when they heard that they were going home, they would always unconsciously reveal their emotions. He did not have such a feeling. It was as if he could float in the void and become one with the universe. Ears! Come quickly! What is this? Xia Bingji's spiritual awareness came over. Lu Xiaoyi slowly walked over. Of course, he knew that it couldn't be an intruder. It could only be that she had found something new. An illusory object was wandering in a valley. Due to the special structure of the valley's walls, the object had been struggling to come out after entering, but it was still persevering. It was a mass of energy, and after careful examination, the two of them determined that it was not a psionic spark. They had never heard of any other psionic spark in the universe besides the jade purity and purple purity. The energy body was very weak, but its life force was very strong. Even if it collided back and forth in the valley countless times, it did not show any signs of exhaustion. What a strange thing! I found it as soon as I entered the valley, and there were always a few strands of psionic spark chasing after it. I couldn't chase them away, and I couldn't pick them up either. They seemed to be more willing to follow this strange thing. Xia Bingji described her discovery. I have an idea. Could this thing be the fragment of the great path that collapsed a few years ago? Lu Xiaoyi observed for a moment and sighed. You guessed right. You shouldn't have called me, because the next scene should be two people turning against each other because of the fragment of the great path and fighting. The vicious swordsman snatched the treasure and the psionic spark, and then killed. Xia Bingji glared at him. Be serious. I feel that this thing is Great Void? Am I right? Lu Xiaoyi nodded, looking unfathomable. Xia Bingji suddenly reacted. You didn't see anything, did you? Are you waiting for me to explain it to you? Lu Xiaoyi was a little embarrassed. Everyone has their own specializations. I'm really having a headache with those roundabout Taoism. Taishu has never come into contact with it before, so he might be able to recognize it after some time. Why bother? Don't I have you? A few years ago, when the two were searching for psionic spark in the void, they had a premonition. This was not the first time. 300 years ago, when the merit collapsed, they felt uneasy. That was the great path of Buddhism. This time, both of them had become nascent souls, and the feeling was stronger. On the day of the collapse, there was the impact of the great path shattering. However, both of them did not cultivate in the direction of Great Void, so it was difficult to determine which one was collapsing. It was not like the time in the 10,000 Buddha continent where there was a perfected cultivator to remind them. The collapse of the Great Path was not something that every cultivator could accurately grasp. Foundation establishment cultivators might feel that something was wrong, but it would pass in the blink of an eye. Jean Dan would feel uneasy for a period of time, but they did not know why. Yuanying's feeling was very strong, but unless their Tao state was in the direction of Great Void, it would be difficult to determine which one was collapsing from the changes in the heavenly Tao. They only knew that it was a certain Tao that belonged to Taoism, the universe. No one could investigate it, so they could only put it aside. Until she saw this energy body with Tao intent, Xiao Bingji guessed that it was the great path of Great Void that was collapsing. Great Void did not belong to the 5 manifestations of the heavens, but it was widely used in Taoism. The 7 major Taoist sects of Zhou Xian had dabbled in it. Unfortunately, Xiao Bingji was not interested in it. My Tao state is in the direction of creation. I don't want to change it now. I can't keep it. Ears, why don't you try? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. Do you think it's appropriate for someone like me who plays with swords to do this? In front of an opponent, once my flying sword comes out, Great Void is coming. Things that may be precious to others are useless in the eyes of the two of them, Lu Xiaoyi suggested. Can't you find something to put it away? Then bring it back to exchange for a spiritual tablet? Xia Bingji was speechless. I've heard of things like selling resources, skills, pills, and artifacts, but I've never heard of selling DAS. Can DAS be bought and sold based on weight? If a cultivator wants to take it away, he can only fuse it with his soul. It stays in the cultivator's sea of consciousness and completely fuses into one, becoming the cultivator's own thing and his own understanding. Do you think it's useless and can be taken away by putting it in a bottle? However, Lu Xiaoyi felt that it was a waste of natural resources. He did not know how many great Tao fragments like this would collapse, but he imagined that the number of immortal heavenly Tao fragments that would fall into a realm like fate was in the single digits. Great Void could not possibly have more, right? It was very precious and should not be wasted. This was Lu Xiaoyi's good habit. Chapter 961. The key was how to capture, store, and carry them without fusing them. Seeing Lu Xiaoyi swindle Tao fragments again, Xiao Bingji felt like she was about to collapse. I've realized that you have the potential to be a child trafficker. Forget it, you can do it yourself. I'll go over there to collect the spirit machine. If they collected more, they would be able to collect 10,000 strands of jade purity in 10 years. This was a terrifying number. Cultivators also had obsessive-compulsive disorder. They always thought that collecting 10,000 strands would be perfect. In fact, 9,000 strands was enough to make people envious. Lu Xiaoyi stared at the Great Void fragment, but he was thinking about something else. After forming his nascent soul this time, he had changed a lot. Not only physically, but also mentally. When humans synchronize their growth process to a certain extent with the progress of the universe, one could imagine how terrifying it was. Even if he was only in a small universe at that time, the basic changes of the universe were the same. As the first living creature in the small universe, his status was similar to that of the ancestors of humans in the main world. Of course, it was not a complete comparison, but there were similarities. After forming his nascent soul for half a century, he had always been searching for the secrets of this body. He had always been discovering and pleasantly surprised. There were too many treasures in his body that needed to be unearthed. It might take a lifetime. When the small world was formed, the first life form was born. He broke himself, and used the east wind to rise up. This was definitely a stroke of genius, and definitely not something that could be replicated. It required too many coincidences. A small world, a stone that had experienced the changes of the universe, coincidences, and Taoism and Buddhism. It felt like stealing from the heavens. Not to mention his body, he had not figured it out yet. In the future, he would find a chance to work on his body, but not now. The main problem now was his mind, his sea of consciousness. Because there were things that he valued the most, the strength of his soul, the big bird in the sparrow palace, and the habitat of the flying sword. In the small universe's transformation of his mind, there were some miraculous changes. At that time, he was only left with a little bit of his true spirit. Through the power of the small universe, he carried out an all-round reconstruction of his body. In this process, the existing heavenly Tao was not the complete heavenly Tao, but flawed. At the very least, there were 3 innate Taoists missing: morality, fate, and merit. If he formed his nascent soul 50 years later, there would be one less great void. Theoretically, it made sense because these 3 great Taoists had collapsed. Morality did not matter. It seemed like he had never had that before. At the very least, he didn't care about it, and didn't pay attention to it. He didn't care about merit either. His problem was fate. The ball of Qi Yuan had always accompanied him throughout his cultivation journey. It had never been separated from him, and he had encountered many fortuitous encounters in the process. Devouring was powerful, so it was natural to be colored. Fusing with the great bird of the Sparrow Palace, every step was a great opportunity that ordinary cultivators could only dream of. When he reached nascent soul, he had no choice but to pay special attention to the direction of his nascent soul Tao realm. Could it be fate? In theory, of course, choosing the direction where one's strength was the most rational decision. But in the end, he did not choose fate. He couldn't reason it out. It was just a vague feeling. If someone were to write a biography of him in the future, things like this could only be attributed to the author's irresponsible willfulness. He had an extremely powerful ball of providence, but he didn't have the support of the great Tao of destiny during the spirit reconstruction. This was very contradictory. Then, a variable appeared in the contradiction. His fate couldn't be eliminated because it was something that existed in the first place. There were also rules for reconstruction. You couldn't create something that didn't exist, and you couldn't make something disappear. But now, there was indeed no great Tao of destiny. Without the support of the innate great Tao, his powerful fate had become a rootless duckweed. It lacked the theoretical basis for its existence. He chose his nascent soul. So, in the end, his fate was still there. However, it wasn't the fate under the innate great Tao, but his own fate. Lu Xi had controlled his fate in his own hands. From now on, no existence could take it away. He could die, but his fate would always be his. An ordinary man couldn't seize fate. This was the portrayal of his current situation. This was a little abnormal. Because in his current state, no one could see his fate anymore because he had already broken away from the fate system under the heavenly Tao. Not to mention seizing it. But from now on, he couldn't devour the fate of others. Because it wasn't something in the same system. He could intercept, destroy, and eliminate the fate of others, but he couldn't take it for his own use. This strange change, in general, was more beneficial than harmful because he no longer intentionally devoured the fate of others. Fate was a mysterious thing, it wasn't a simple accumulation of energy. The more he devoured, the better. In the future, his fate would be completely controlled by himself. The rise of his cultivation level, the change of his state of mind, the increase of his strength, the special experiences, and so on, would have nothing to do with others. His own fate, an independent fate, this suited his personality very well, even if he might wander outside the broken great Tao of destiny because of it. Under such a premise, the Sparrow Palace in his sea of consciousness had a strange change. The Sparrow Palace was still there, the big bird was still there, but it seemed to have changed. It wasn't as elegant, beautiful, and outstanding as before. It became ordinary, and uglier. To be specific, purely from the characteristics of its body, it had a belly, its fur had changed from rainbow to grayish-black, its wings were no longer slender and had become short and thick, its beak had become sharper, and its claws had become sharper. When it came out of its body, it didn't make a clear cry, but a caw-caw sound. It was just like King Old Crow. Its eyes were no longer arrogant and cold, but had become cruel and bloodthirsty. Especially when it came out of its sword, it became blood red. It made the monstrous killing intent on his flying sword become sharper and sharper. Putting aside the ugliness, the other changes were quite in line with his wishes. It had become more like Lu Xiui. The most extraordinary thing was that his flying sword, Seven Ant, wasn't reared in the old crow's belly, but had transformed into a beak. It was unknown if the old crow had transformed into the flying sword, or if the flying sword had transformed into the old crow. As its wings had become short and thick, the frequency of its vibrations had increased, and the speed of its sword had also increased. The flying sword had evolved to such an extent that it had long broken away from the form of a sword case and sword pellet. It was no longer in the form of a sword disc. It was in the form of Lu Shui. Growing together with him, there was no longer any separation. There was no need to fuse with heavenly treasures, nor was there a need to deliberately break through. Every step he took, 7 Ant would synchronize with him. The man was the sword, and the sword was the man. One with the sword, this was in line with his understanding of the swordsman. The old crow's belly was where he placed his hopes. He had a premonition that this belly could swallow any energy body with the nature of great Tao. The crux was how to get the great Tao fragment in. It wasn't that he really wanted to comprehend the great void, as he didn't have that much free time. He really wanted to use this item to exchange for a spirit tablet. It was a very simple and practical idea. Since he had nothing to do in this place, why not dig out the powers of his Sparrow Palace while collecting the Great Void Fragment? Chapter 962. The two of them, one continuing to gather spiritual energy while the other persisting in abduction, both hoped that this trip to the universe would have a perfect ending. In fact, their 10 years of cooperation had been perfect and smooth. It was so smooth that even the heavens couldn't stand it anymore and wanted to find trouble for them. Xia Bingji was gathering spiritual energy when she suddenly received a message from Lu Xiao in her mind. She sighed and gave up on gathering spiritual energy. She found a hidden place nearby and hid her body. Her aura became faint and finally disappeared completely. This was a routine that she and Lu Xiaoyi had practiced for a long time. It was the best way to deal with strange cultivators. In Ear's words, "Your face is the source of trouble." Of course, this was a joke. The advantage of this method was that Lu Xiaoyi could fight without any scruples and she didn't have to walk between life and death. If something happened to Lu Xiaoyi in the end, she would be the last trump card. Every orthodoxy had its own specialties. For example, Xia Bingji's orthodoxy was very good at hiding. When she really used it, even Lu Xiaoyi wouldn't be able to find her unless he was very close to her. When she was escaping in the meteorite, she couldn't use this skill because she was too passive and was being chased too tightly. If she suddenly stopped breathing, even a fool would know that she must have hidden herself. But now, it was different. No one knew that there were two people here. Moreover, Ear was very annoying and had a strong ability to attract hatred. There were 4 people, for late Yuanying stage cultivators. In the universe, such a small team was considered quite strong. Because they didn't bring any newcomers, their actions were relatively unrestrained. The asteroid wasn't big and Lu Xiaoyi didn't deliberately hide, so they found him and the fragment of the Great Void Tao at the first moment. "You Taoist, the so-called opportunity belongs to the virtuous. It doesn't matter who came first. If you get out of the way now, at least you can keep your life." The leading Taoist was very rude. It was because there were many people and also because of the general unscrupulous mood after the collapse of the Great Tao. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. In such a universal cultivation atmosphere, he had very little room for choice. The fact that the 4 of them did not mention anything about invading the universe meant that they were also outsiders of this universe. The fact that they came straight to the asteroid meant that they must have some way to track the aura of the Great Void Fragment from a long distance. It wasn't that he didn't want to help others, but it was a matter of attitude. Did the current cultivation world not even have the patience to negotiate? He wanted to let Xia Bingji know that he was not a lunatic who had killed countless people. He was very reasonable. "When I was young, when I played with other children, if I took a fancy to someone's toy, how would I get the chance to play with it? My mother told me that you have to be kind and polite, and that you have to tell the other children your name. Which family's child was he?" Would the elders of their respective clans still interact with each other? Toys won't break, and the owner might even get a few candies. In the future, they might even become friends and deal with other ignorant children together. Xia Bingji, who had concealed herself, sighed. She finally understood why this person kept getting into trouble and fighting non-stop. His mouth was really too smelly. It would have been better if he didn't say these so-called polite words, but once he did, he would definitely fight. Originally, he had the mentality of getting rid of the problem, but now, he was probably going to kill him. Sure enough, one of the Taoists shouted angrily. "How dare you! Are you saying that we have no manners?" Lu Xiai said slowly. "The difference between humans and animals is that humans don't act according to their instincts. Humans will consider the feelings of their own kind. You're all cultivating Tao, but you've cultivated yourself into animals?" Before he could finish, a spell had already descended, forming an illusory realm around him. Demons and devils were everywhere. It was the void realm reality that the cultivators of the great void orthodoxy loved to play with. Most of these demons and monsters were illusory, and only a few of them were real. However, they were formed by spells. Those who didn't know this realm and didn't have a strong will would find it hard to distinguish between the illusory and real. In a battle, as long as there was a slight mistake in judgment, they would be able to find an opening and take advantage of it. Lu Xiui struck out with his sword and struck the virtual image twice in a row. However, relying on his speed, he was able to narrowly avoid the real danger when it came. He was also in a very sorry state. The 4 Taoists in the sky were very disdainful. "We only heard his words and didn't see his skills. We thought that he was a famous cultivator. Who knew that when he attacked? Sai, how did this person survive until now? Swordsmen are all like this. They think that they are omnipotent and can kill those who are stronger than them. That's why they don't care about cultivators in the same realm. Even a small beginner Yuanying has such an attitude. However, the only good thing about him is that his speed is not bad. I'll add another mirage realm and he won't be able to escape." Another Taoist cast a spell to prevent Lu Xiaoi from escaping. Those who lived in the universe knew the principle of cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots. If the snake wasn't killed, there would be endless trouble. One day, they might be surrounded by the swordsmen. Just as the Mirage Realm was activated, the battle below changed again. Lu Xiaoi was in the Mirage Realm. With his mental state, how could he be confused by such a small illusion? He also had a basic understanding of the Great Void. This was the benefit of him when he formed his nascent soul. He had the most basic understanding of all the innate Taos other than the virtues and virtues. Just like when he saw the Great Void fragment, he had already understood it. It wasn't like he said that he didn't know it. He just didn't want to appear too perverted and wanted to leave some space for the woman to perform. In the Taoist Mirage Realm, he was always able to escape from danger. This wasn't luck, but wisdom. However, this kind of deception couldn't last long. If he did it a few more times, it would definitely arouse suspicion. There were no fools in the universe. The reason why he did this was because he wasn't confident. He wasn't confident that he could kill all 4 of them. The 4 Taoists knew how to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. Of course, he also knew that the principle of doing things in the universe was to not leave any loose ends. With his current strength, it wouldn't be so troublesome to deal with a late-stage Yuanying. But if there were 4 of them, there would be too many variables. He would have to consider their cooperation. If something went wrong, he would have to run away and leave Xia Bingji here alone. It would be very inconvenient. After cultivating for hundreds of years, he had always tried his best not to cross the boundary. He tried his best not to fight alone. If he could fight with a group, he would fight with a group. If he could fight with a group, he wouldn't fight with an adult unless he had no other choice under special circumstances. For late-stage nascent soul stage cultivators were already beyond his capability. It was not like shooting targets one by one while hiding on the meteorite. Under the joint attack of the 4 of them, his weak cultivation base would have a fatal flaw because of the huge gap between them, It was something that could not be solved no matter how brilliant the sword arts were. Therefore, it wasn't that he had a bad mouth. It was that he had to make full use of the fact that he was still unknown in the universe. He had to make the first move when his opponents were careless. This was a tactical choice. Strategically, he didn't want to let any of them go. Whether he could fight or not depended on how many he could ambush. Chapter 963. The other Taoist was casting the mirage outside, so he was very clear about this. This was an opportunity. It was very difficult to pay attention to one's own safety while others were fighting, especially when one of his companions was attacking and the other three were watching from the sidelines. What other choice did the swordsman have other than to escape? How could he continue to provoke the three spectators? Even an idiot wouldn't do that, right? That ordinary flying sword continued to slash through the air, sweeping past the illusory demon that didn't even exist. This had already happened many times. Next, this flying sword would automatically change directions and look for its next target. The only coincidence was that the flying sword was slashing in a straight line with the Taoist casting the mirage outside. No one cared. The most crucial part of a spell cultivator's premonition of the swordsman's flying sword was when the flying sword was released. When the flying sword finished accelerating, the spell cultivator had very little time left. For a flying sword with a spirit, hitting the target was inevitable. The only difference was whether the spell cultivator's defense was perfect. Of course it wasn't, because he was casting the mirage. Therefore, when he noticed that something was wrong with the flying sword and his two senior brothers' divine sense warned him, he had already lost the last bit of time to set up his defense. His body had just swayed when the flying sword pierced through him. The explosive sword she displayed a destructive power that was completely different from the normal flying sword itself. It flew like a slingshot, but only when it hit him would he know that it was a rocket launcher. That was his last thought. Lu Xiaoyi naturally wouldn't let the Taoist who was fighting with him go. This was his original plan. If he could successfully ambush two at once, this battle would be very easy. If he could only ambush one, he would bring the other three to the depths of the universe. If he couldn't even ambush one, then he would have to run. With his current ability, he could easily split out two sword beams to attack two people. However, the Taoist in the middle of the battle was still very alert. He was not sure if he could really split out two sword beams to attack both of them. Therefore, he used his flying sword to attack the Taoist in the middle of the battle and used his old crow to attack the Taoist in the middle of the battle. The old crow was truly ferocious. Its mental power directly destroyed the opponent's sea of consciousness. It was no longer a matter of how long the opponent would take to recover, but whether the injury could be healed. What happened next was a matter of one sword strike. Before the remaining two Taoists could save him, the sword shadows filled the sky and he began his most incisive sword strike. Xia Bingji, who was buried in the rock wall, heard such a sound. Her eardrums were filled with the shrill whistling of the sword, which was getting closer and closer, more and more frequent, and more urgent. She couldn't judge the specific situation, but it shouldn't be too bad. Otherwise, this guy would have already run away with his opponent. After being together for so long, she knew very well that once the battle started, this guy's calmness would be completely different from his usual unruly self. Then, all of a sudden, the sword whistled far away, and the surroundings returned to normal. It was obvious that the battlefield had been shifted, but it was unknown whether it was done on its own initiative or passively. Xia Bingji still couldn't control her curiosity, and she didn't think it was a good idea to continue burying herself here. If that guy really failed, it would be safest for her to leave. When she came out, what she saw were 3 floating corpses in the void. It was obvious that this guy left in the end to eliminate the source of trouble. Looking at the valley again, the spiritual vigils had already fled, and the fragment of the great void was nowhere to be seen. It must have escaped while the spiritual vigils were in disorder during the fierce battle. It didn't matter, since neither of them needed it, and neither of them could get it. The killing of the universe was magnified after the collapse of the great Tao. There was no right or wrong in this, for cultivators who were proficient in the great Tao of the Great Void came together to take what should have belonged to them, just because their attitude wasn't good enough. If it had to be based on right or wrong, good or evil, then that guy was the evil one, right? From the beginning, it was a deliberate massacre, and he didn't really consider settling the possible disputes peacefully. However, if it was done according to her way, what would the final result be? Would there really be a good result if she gave away the fragment of the Great Void? She didn't know. Intuition told her that if she gave away the first time, there would be a second time. If she gave away the fragment of the Great Tao, should she give away the spiritual vigils in the storage ring? Should she give away her life? Not long after, a familiar aura fluctuation came, and Lu Xiao waved his hand from afar. "Let's go, senior sister!" The two of them immediately made their way back, turning a blind eye to the possible spiritual vigils in the past. If they continued to gather spiritual vigils along the way, they didn't know when they would be able to return home. 2 years later, the two of them parted outside the atmosphere of Zhou, and they didn't make any plans for the future. With their combination, it wasn't suitable for them to travel together. They would be a burden to each other in battle, and they would still be a burden to each other when gathering spiritual vigils. Just like the married couple back then, they were still partners now. Lu Xiaoyi went straight back to carefree travel. After he became a nascent soul, he only returned to this so-called sect once. It was a little too dull, and this wasn't good. Everything was drifting away from the main theme, and his eyes and ears were not very sharp. His human relations were still in the Great Freedom Hall, but the person in charge was now a true lord, a genuine carefree person. His attitude could be described as carefree. It was irresponsible. Yes. After becoming a nascent soul, you need to consolidate. Consolidate. Especially since your foundation is still relatively weak. After all, it's not the foundation of your cultivation technique. Now that you've consolidated your cultivation, you want to go out into the void of the universe? Let me take a look for you. Which teams are going out to gather spiritual vigils recently? I can bring you along. Great, this true lord was really muddle-headed. He thought that he was cooped up in this sect to consolidate his cultivation. After all, his 1-inch nascent soul when he first became a nascent soul was too embarrassing. No one would think that he had become a nascent soul from the ancient times. They thought that this nascent soul was very complete, somewhere between normal and abnormal. If it was another person, a cultivator with a proper carefree background, in this situation, there would definitely be elders and seniors who would ask about his well-being and find a solution together. However, he was a new follower, and one who had his own foundation in Little Lu. In the subconscious minds of most major cultivators, this kind of person couldn't be more suitable to become a complete nascent soul. Didn't he have the protection of the ancestor? Shouldn't this kind of matter be handled by the ancestor? If they acted without permission, wouldn't they be flattering the ancestor instead? As a result, very few true monarchs cared about his matters. In the past few hundred years, the number of nascent soul cultivators had doubled. There were too many troublesome matters, so who would deliberately take care of him? Martial uncle, this disciple hasn't just been cultivating in the sect all these years. I also went to the void to take a look. Lu Xiaoyi didn't tell the complete truth. There was a huge difference between looking at the void for 50 years and looking at it for a few years. The true lord nodded. You went to the void of the universe? Yes, you did. Cultivators of our generation should be careful of the universe. The universe is your home. Only by broadening your horizons can you go further. Everything was good? Lu Xiaoyi stated his request. This disciple wants to go back to Yaoying to take a look. That's also a carefree property, so I can't just ignore it. The true lord said. Yaoying is good. Body in the universe, heart in the world, good. Chapter 964. In the past 50 years, our shaking shadow realm has gained another 6 yuanying. Song Rong reported with a joyful expression. Lu Xue raised his eyebrows. Oh, that means there are 11 yuanying? No, that's not right, we have to count down Master Mao as well. 12. Song Rong smiled bitterly. 10. I lost 2 brothers outside. Seeing Lu Xiaoyi's inquisitive gaze, Song Rong smiled awkwardly. They were all killed in a group fight in the universe. I was there once when we fought against cultivators from other universes. We won the fight in the end, but the losses were unavoidable. There was nothing we could do about it. Lu Xiaoyi was just asking casually. He didn't think about how he could help them settle the matter. The universe was so big, and the future was so long. It was impossible to settle it all. This was a big stage, and the change of the era was imminent. Those who couldn't keep up were destined to be eliminated. I have some new insights. I can't guarantee that I'll be right when I reach the nascent soul realm. The only thing I can say is that I've walked this path without any mistakes. Call them all over. I'll teach you all a lesson. Lu Xiaoyi was full of confidence for this lesson. This was because his flying sword system had finally taken shape after 700 years of cultivation. Now that the flying sword system was set, everything else had a standard. He didn't have to constantly search for it like before. This was what he wanted to instill in his swordsman subordinates. Nothing was certain. Learning to deny oneself was a good habit. Being complacent in the current environment would only lead to elimination. His path might not necessarily be the path of others, but there was more than one path to the upper realm. As long as they put in the effort and dared to try, they would eventually find a path that belonged to them. However, the swordsmen were more concerned about this time. Che Xia asked the question that everyone wanted to know. About the collapse of the Tao, does the sword master have anything to remind us? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. This had to be explained clearly. Otherwise, who knew what these daring fellows would do? There are a few things that I'm certain of. Actually, you all already know. First, the collapse of the Great Tao was a trend, but the timing was uncertain. It might speed up, or it might take a longer time. But with the universe's heavenly Tao's endurance, it is impossible for the 30 or so innate Taos to collapse at the same time. Thus, it will take a longer time, so long that there is no need for you to think about it now. A few thousand years is the minimum. Are you sure you can live until then? The swordsman laughed. Nandang pondered and said, Swordmaster, are you saying that we don't have to think too much about the changes in the future? Regardless of whether the Great Tao will collapse or not, we should choose the one that suits us. We don't have to think about which Great Tao will collapse in the end and deliberately choose it? Lu Xiaoyi pointed at him and said, Nandang, you stepped on my heel and got some of my spiritual energy. That's right. If the Tao realm you chose when you formed your nascent soul was the one that collapsed in the end, then congratulations. Your cultivation strength and swordsmanship will be stronger because of the Great Tao. If you choose the Tao realm and it collapses, or if you choose a Tao realm that has already collapsed, it's not a big deal. Once it disintegrated, it would recombine. All of you have the experience of going through this process in advance. This is to build a foundation for you to attempt the unification of the Tao in the future. The collapse of the Great Tao doesn't mean that it's gone. It's just that it's not systematic and there's no clear structure. There's no standard. But this also means that the direction you're heading in might be the correct one. These words made the swordsman very excited. Who didn't want to unify the Tao in cultivation? Even if the chances were slim. From what I know, in the 9 great sects, there are many cultivators who choose the Tao realm that has already collapsed. I won't say which is right and which is wrong, because they all have their reasons. You just have to follow your heart. Don't be deliberate. This is the essence of cultivation. Let nature take its course. You will never be wrong. Looking at the crowd, there were Yuanying and Jin Dan cultivators. There were hundreds of them. The shaking shadow realm was really flourishing now. It was also a good time. Whether it was Yuanying, Jean Dan, or Foundation establishment, the upper level was much easier than it was a few hundred years ago. And it was foreseeable that it would be even easier in the future. Secondly, when the great Tao collapses, there will be fragments floating in the void of the universe. Those who are strong will obtain them. This is not a rumor. This may not be good news for the Jean Dan cultivators, but you all have a chance. If the Tao of Zenith Heaven collapses, it will be like the fate of morality, spreading to the mortal world. Maybe you can sleep for a while and the great Tao will come to you. The swordsman laughed. If the great Tao of the 5 elements and time collapsed, it would be the beginning of a new era, right? When the end of the world came, how many people would be able to see it? At the very least, they would have to reach the level of young God perfected Lord. Who could guarantee that they would be able to do it? Lu Xiaoyi laughed. So, this is actually still a mess. Just like the previous collapse of merit. This time, the Great Void. Which of you can unify the fragments of the Great Tao? The Yuanying cultivators sighed. None of them were in the direction of the Great Void. Even if they went to the void of the universe, it would be useless. Could they find it? Even if they found it, they couldn't unify it. It was meaningless. Just as the Swordmaster said, there was no difference between knowing too much and not knowing at all. Those who did not have a strong will and liked to think about other things would be better off not knowing. It would be a waste of time. Lu Xie sighed. Chaos is coming. What should we do? Predict? I'm sorry, but I'm afraid your guess is not even close. Make plans? It's a pity that plans can't change so quickly. Even a perfected Lord may not be able to design the most correct path for himself, let alone us Yuanying and Jean Dan cultivators. So my suggestion is to do what is within the scope of your abilities. Lu Xiaoyi's expression was serious. First, set a small goal for yourself. Jean Dan, think about how to become a nascent soul. If you can't do it in such a big environment, wouldn't you be too useless? Yuanying, live for 100 years first. The void of the universe is not peaceful now. Survival is the way of the king. In this chaotic world, strength is the most important thing. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Cultivation is like climbing a tower. If you're on the first level, just think about the second. If you insist on thinking about the peaches of immortality at the top level, it's not wise. Work hard to improve your cultivation and swordsmanship, protect your home, and help your brothers. This is what you can do now. Do it. If you keep doing it, you will realize that your goal might be closer to you. He stood up. The sword vein is a hole. How to survive in the cracks of Buddhism is what we should consider. As for the change of era, leave it to the taller people to shoulder. Lu Xiaoyi walked out of the hall, leaving the group deep in thought. He had said what he needed to say. He was also doing what was within the scope of his abilities. But he would not add more burdens to himself. Actually, he was not only talking about these swordsman brothers, but also himself. Although he had become a nascent soul, the changes at the top level were still too far away from him. It had nothing to do with him. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.